I'll text you.
Good morning. Greetings to the viewers of the Dr. Obitashaka Show. And I want to welcome our two great guests. You're going to really enjoy this show, Miss Brianna Moore and Gloria Young Thomas. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
It's my favorite thing when I have sisters to interview and real conscious sisters. And then one of these sisters, we have a special kind of relationship going back quite a ways. And then in the case of Brianna, we've been forging a relationship and she's just been bringing on all her brilliance. So this is going to be a real special pleasure right here. And then top it off, we're getting all their expertise because these are two real sharp sisters who happen to be best friends. We'll go into that in a minute. So before getting into today's interview, I want to remind people who are watching the show and haven't subscribed to hit the subscriber button. And for those of you that don't know how to subscribe, email me and we'll give you directions because I have a good friend that does not know how to go through the subscriber thing. And Brianna, your picture is kind of fading, so maybe you need to come up closer to the mic or something, you know?
Can you see me?
Yeah, it's just not, it's not real sharp there for some reason. Yeah. Hopefully, hopefully it'll come in and get a little sharp. Yeah. Yeah, so make sure you hit the subscriber button, and to Sasha Petrie and King Pianki Hotep, good to have you here. I recently, when giving you a review on the show that's been operating now for a little over a year, I gave you a picture of the analytics on the show. And one of the things that I didn't point out is that we need to really up the subscriber numbers. And so you going out and encouraging your friends to watch and subscribe to the show will be real helpful. Starting in December, around the 1st, Brother Ogawa, who has been helping me out on this show, he's been volunteering his own time, will have a second YouTube channel set up. And this second channel will feature brief excerpts of previous shows that we put on. Because, you know, my shows have gone on 2.5, 3 hours, and I built up a very dedicated following based on that. But, you know, a lot of the viewers of YouTube and Facebook, Instagram and Twitter have short attention spans. You know what I mean? And that's a recent feature for our people, because we can go to church and listen to a preacher preach for an hour, and listen to Farrakhan for 4. And I know I can hold an audience for a while, and most of us can, because, you know, we come out of a deep culture, and especially oral culture. But with this dumbing down of what I call the ignornet, there are 3 nets: the Afronet, the Infonet, and the ignornet. And most people are listening to the ignornet, you know, short attention spans. They get a whole, and it's also the assumption net. I should call it the ASS net, you know what I mean? Where people are just talking off the top of their head, blue, blue, blue. We'll listen to that for a long time, you know what I mean? So that's the reason for setting up the second YouTube channel, is to have short splices of different shows. And Brother Ogawa is very insightful, so he's pulled out some good short clips. And that's designed to hook people in to the show and to listen longer. We're also setting up 2 new platforms, one on Twitter, the other one on Instagram. Now, I know Twitter is a 1 minute, 2 to 3 minute platform. And believe it or not, as long-winded as I am, I'm also good at that. Because in the San Francisco Freedom Movement, we did press conferences of a minute and a half. And I knew how to do that. I still do, believe it or not. And I can give 20-minute speeches before kids.
What?
Before kids.
I don't believe that.
Yeah, I've got some. In fact, I'm going to put them up. In fact, I gave one at Webster Elementary School, 20 minutes before 300 parents and kids. It was directed to the kids. And so I can do that. You know, I can. Million Man March for 6 minutes. It's on my site. Go watch it. So I can do that. But I'm an in-depth person. That's why I taught at San Francisco State. Taught at all levels except high school. So, but I'm saying that Agawa correctly noted, and as other people, including my wife, has told me, you need to do shorter stuff. So I get both worlds, the depth and the surface. And the surface is designed like a fish to put bait on it, to hook you in. You know what I mean? So thanks to Brother Agawa, we're going to have a platform on Twitter and Instagram, and people will be encouraged to subscribe to that. So encourage people to check that out. And there's a lot of other things we're doing here because we need strategy to build a larger audience. And I'm not the expert on this, just as we have experts today who are going to be taking us through a lot of the problems that affect us with addictions. So we got experts in this younger generation that know this computer world in ways I'm not even interested in learning and never will know. And then my own computer expert, Brother Cinnabar, who has been key to the success of this show. There you go. Yeah, Brianna looks much
better.
better. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So that's a change. Thank you, Brother Agawa. You know, he's been helpful on this and other things. The other thing I want to remind people is to subscribe to the year-long webinar, 6 Bold Stages to Mental Freedom. It's really mental and spiritual freedom. And you're going to see again today how this is very helpful because it's the ultimate healing system that healed Malcolm, that healed Amilcar Cabral, that healed a whole lot of Black folks, the sister Assata Shakur and others, you know. And it's the ultimate, baby. I mean, you're talking about free the mind so you can free the behind. This will get you straight up. You hear me? You'll be so free, they're going to be people wondering, what happened to you?
That's
you know
right.
You'll be so high that those who had experienced the other kinds of addictions, they will feel like, well, hey, this was a joke. This is the real deal. High on yourself. You know what I mean? And some of y'all high on God because that's also a part of your awakening process.
That's
so,
right.
So I encourage people to check out this webinar, 6 Bold Stages to Mental Freedom. It'll be a year-long thing, twice a month. So for today's discussion and interview, we have Sister Brianna Moore, an associate clinical social worker. She's been on the show before and she shared her wisdom and her honesty. And I think people really appreciate both. And I really like you, Brianna. You sound tough. You ain't no joke. You hear me? There should be a whole bunch of men lined up that you screen. You know what I mean? And you can.
Okay, so anytime you want to help with that, you can help me with that because I'm sick. You can help me with that.
Okay. By accident, I pulled a few off, and maybe even on purpose I could. Because since I went through my awakening, if you had asked me before 1990 to do that, I wouldn't have been equipped. But since I went through my crisis, I've been able to do a little bit of that. So if I can, I sure will. I'll say, boy, but I'll tell you, only the qualified need to apply. You hear me? And then I'm very fortunate to have on the show today Gloria Young Thomas, who's a licensed clinical social worker, got a master's degree in her field. Both of these ladies do. But we have a special relationship. And when Brianna told me, oh, you know, my best friend is Gloria Young Thomas, I said, what? Huh? Because Gloria was one of my students in Black Studies at San Francisco State, and I had over 16,000. I don't remember all the students I had, but there are few that stand out as special. And Gloria, you are one of the most special students that I had, and there are a lot of reasons. I learned from you that, a teacher is a student. So I learned from you. You did a paper, a 699 paper on the causes of addiction among Black males and what led them to recovery. And that gave me the deepest insights into addiction. In this particular case, I think it was alcohol. And because in my family, it runs, just about everybody's family, and then friends and others that I know, relatives and whatnot. And so it was really insightful. But the thing that I like most about you is your growth, the way you've gone through life, and the good that you, and that's also true with Brianna, that both of you are doing for our people. So you're real special. Every time I get to see you, because we've been out to the same festivals, the Hayward Russell City Blues Festivals, and I see you there and we get to talk, and then I introduce you to my wife and tell my wife about you. A special place in my heart for you. So you're real special.
Thank you. So, okay. I appreciate you. I had no idea what was going to happen for me. I just knew I had this dream that I had to go to college. And I worked with people. Even our receptionist had a degree and I didn't. And people that looked like me along the way said, Gloria, you're never going to get a big kick upstairs if you don't go back to school. You have got to go back to school. And I would have dreams about being in school every so often. So in my recovery development, at a year and a half, I enrolled at City College, a year and a half free from alcohol, drugs, hanging out, all that. I enrolled in City College, and my first semester, I took things that I thought would hold my interest, like Black Studies, minority psychology, jazz history, and theater, because I wanted to be a movie star. And I took those classes, and those classes turned out to be the foundation that prepared me for you, San Francisco State, and you, and the Black Studies Department. You and others looked at me in the face almost daily and said, look, young lady, and some of these people were younger than me, said, now look, this education is not just for you. You have got to make sure that everybody who looks like you benefits from you being on this campus. You're going to have to conduct yourself like a professional wherever you are, but you're going to have to be equipped. You came here with a lot, and you made this real clear. It still touches my heart. You said, you came here with a lot, young lady. Our job is to refine what you have. And that's what all of you did. You took a special interest in me, and you pushed me when I was struggling. You pushed me when I was late on papers, and you pushed me when I did good. And, that's something that I was loved by my family, but all of us know that when you get outside, you can run into all kind of unloving things, uncaring things, things that hurt and harm you, things that reduce you to feeling like you're not worth much. And I ran into a lot of those things along the way. So what you guys did for me is something. I don't care if I was as rich as Oprah and I paid for everybody to go to college. I still would never be able to show you just how grateful I am that you were willing to invest in me and my education and prepare me and do what you said you were going to do. You refined who I was. And I had never even heard that word. So I thank you. I will thank you for the rest of my life.
It's the same here, because I grew through teaching as well as organizing, and I learned from my students. and you're one that I learned more from than most. And it wasn't just the paper, it was the insights, but it was also your transformation. And seeing that was really inspiring. And so, yeah, once I heard Brianna said, yeah, Gloria Young Thomas, she's my best friend. I said, what? Where is she? She's down south now. She's in Texas. I said, oh, okay. And then turns up you right here in the Bay Area. I said, hey, we got to hook this up. There's going to be more hookups than this. So
one thing I want to say about that, Baba, is that she is a part of a tribe of women that we followed each other to go to school. And one graduated, and then the next graduated, and the next graduated. And at my graduation in 2000, they were all there. And I was the MC for the graduation. So they had this little script for me, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, I'll do that. And I didn't. All stand up. I said, these are the women on whose shoulders I stand, in addition to my mother. And we supported each other through that. We loved each other. It was a hard process. It was being early in recovery. And what we knew was that we had to stand there for other young women that were coming along after us as well. And we all understand. Sharon took Black Studies underneath her, and Brenda or Amandra, she was just forging ahead in school. I got to get this done. She's got her doctorate now. And then Gloria went on to be a licensed clinical social worker, and she's still encouraging me to go ahead and get licensed. So we're still in connection with one another. But one of the things that I think is important is that it's important, and that's what we learned from San Francisco State, is to reach back and pull somebody else up. That's our responsibility to the young women in our community, that we can't, with drugs and alcohol, I feel that I personally failed them, because my mother and her posse, or her tribe, or her cabinet, that's what I call them, my cabinet. And that her cabinet could say, don't do that, stop that, pull that dress down, that doesn't look right, no, don't say that. But with the influx of drugs and alcohol into our community, we left all our young girls, and they were out there floundering, trying to figure it out with no mentors, no coaches, nobody trying to tell them, this is how you get this done. And so now it's our responsibility, it has been for the last 35 years, to go back and to reach back and to coach them and to nurture them and to model for them what it is to be a Black woman, a successful Black woman, a successful, proud Black woman, who look good, who speak well, who got some financial resources, can pick up and travel and do whatever it is that you want to do. So, I think that people have to have tribes, and we are definitely an example of what tribalism means.
Right on. And that's the real value of programs like Africana Studies, then when you were going through it, Black Studies, and others that transmit consciousness. Gloria, what years were you at State?
I was there from 91. I transferred from Sacramento State to San Francisco, because after City College, I went to Sacramento first, came back to San Francisco because this was all where my love and support mainly were. And I enrolled in the fall of 91. And I finished my bachelor's in 93, and I went into the social work program in the fall of 94. I had one semester off, that whole 8 years, had that spring semester off, but that fall of 94, I attended the social work program and graduated in 96. So I had I had this long run, if you will, with loving, caring educators, and that was the difference of me. The words like university or college weren't spoken in my home growing up. I was told, look, you got to finish school so you can get you a job and take care of your family. I knew at 5 years old, I was going to have a family. I knew I was going to have a job, and I knew that job was going to help me take care of my family. So my parents, there were some college people in my family, but they weren't in my immediate household. So I have a couple of cousins that are doctors, couple that are lawyers, but they're in LA or Beaumont, Texas. I didn't grow up, close to them. And everybody I grew up with around in my family we all had the same message. So when I went back to school, it was foreign. My mother cried and said, "No, you're not going to leave that good job." She literally cried. "I can't believe you're going to leave that good job to go to school for what? What you going to do that for?" And she cried because, one, she didn't know of such a thing. And two, I now believe she felt like, "Oh, Lord, I'm already helping her. I'm going to have to help her more. And I ain't got no more money." And so, people were frightened. My children were even frightened when I said, they were like, "God, we're gonna be broke forever if you do that." Because we did not know that education, for some, it ain't for everybody, but for some, it is the stabilizer. And it is the foundation that builds, that we receive the building in education that allows us to build a bigger person and a more solid person. And that's what I received from all of you. I mean, professors that I didn't even have at San Francisco State used to stop me in the hall and say, "Hey, young lady, what you working on this week? What you got going on? How the kids? So y'all all right?" That would have never happened to me at a completely white university. They would have looked at me in their office hours and said, "What's your question?" And I'd have told them. They said, "Okay, well, you need to figure that out. I'll talk to you later." Click.
Right.
But you guys gave me what people of African descent. I just said this. We're wired for love. We're wired for a war we go to war in love. And we're wired in that way. We respond to people looking at us in the eye, embracing us, reminding us, like Brianna said, reminding us that, baby, that's not the way to get that done. You looking bad right now. You not, And then given the kind of love that encourages us to reach out and correct whatever is going on that's not making us be all that we can be.
Yeah, and especially when it's coming from your own culture and people who've got some love for themselves. And the reason I ask you what were the years, I didn't remember exactly, is those are the times in which places like Black Studies or wherever was a refuge also, because the communities were in war zones, still are. And so young people, some younger than you, and then in your age group, that was a place where you could go, and young men not worried about being shot at. So, I mean, that was a tragic nature of what we're going to get into today, and, what was affecting Black communities. So that was a whole nother side. And thanks to the strikers who brought this about. I walked that strike, but these young people that fought to bring about these kinds of programs and universities and colleges around the country, they are owed a special thanks, and especially my good friend, Dr. Nathan Hare, who is a father of Black Studies, and the first person I hired when I became chair, tried to get tenured. And he's an ex-boxer as well. So he's a fighter in more than one sense. I really like him.
I gotta throw in this. Dr. Julia Hare was my broadcasting professor at City College.
Oh, okay.
And every day after class, I walked her to BART. And every day after class, she poured into me, and I was just a sponge, right? We started off just these little conversations, and then she, "Well, come walk me to the corner. Well, come walk me to." We start walking on purpose to BART, from City College to the Balboa BART station every day, just so she could pour into me. And I had a TV show on the San Francisco Public Access. She saw my first show, and she critiqued it in a way that when I think about her words, I still get tearful. And she still remains somebody in my life that, you know how God gives you these angels, but you know they're big, right? You know something big is happening, but you never had it before, so you can't articulate it, you can't explain it, you just know you can't unplug, right? The days that I sit and remember those times and how she poured into me and how she took a special interest in me, you know, one day needs to be in a book. I'll just say that.
Yeah, Julia was a friend of mine. I could tell you some stories. Well, I just tell you, she lost the job because she had me on a show, and I warned her, don't put me on the show. I'm a strategist. I can tell you what's going to happen. I said, Julia, when I'm finished, because I was debating somebody, I'm going to clean his clock. And the people that run that show, they're going to fire you. I said, don't put me on the show. She put me on. She got fired and didn't tell me until 7 years later that she got fired.
Wow.
That was Julia for you.
Yeah.
She was quite a lady.
Queen.
And Nathan Hare, quite a man, looked after his wife when serious case of Alzheimer's. And you know, Nathan has his own issues health-wise, you know, in terms of hips and stuff like that. But that's, again, our people, you know.
That's right.
Our people come first. So I've got a lot of respect for both of them. Now I want to get into the topic for today's show, which is what are the causes and solutions to addiction? And Brianna had made the point of stressing it's not only drugs and alcohol we'll deal with, though primarily, because there's other forms of addictions. So what are the causes and solutions to addictions, with the emphasis on solutions to both alcohol addiction and especially drug addiction, those two. So I wanted to start this with asking both of you a question about the personal causes that drive addiction, that are the causes of addiction, that deal with personal pain. Can the two of you describe some of the personal traumas that are connected to addiction, especially alcoholism and drug addiction, but other addictions as well?
Okay, I'll jump in. First, I know that addiction is both environmental and genetic. And so for me personally, I grew up in public housing in Potrero Hill. And I was really very proud of being from the projects because I went to school in Potrero Hill, and then I went to high school, and we were sectioned off in certain parts of the city. Some people went to Mission, some people went to Poly, and some people went to Gal. I went to Galileo. So there was still a sense of community and pride, and we were never alone. My mother was a domestic worker, and my dad was a Pullman porter, a doorman, and a taxi cab driver, hardworking brother. And as a result of all that hard work and stress, in 1964, he died when I was 12 years old of a massive heart attack. And but he taught me how to be distinguished. He was always sharp, clean as the Board of Health, always a suit, always a brim, always knob, shiny, right? My mother always said you could tell a lot about a man by his shoes. If they got tore up raggedy shoes, that's why them tennis shoe things, I ain't with that. You got to have on some nice. If your tennis shoes, they still got to be cute. But I go to my daddy. My daddy would not have on those shoes. So I digress a little bit. Some things are still like in your DNA, right? So, but there were these women in the building that watched out for us and that helped us and that corrected us, like I mentioned earlier. And then, you know, I went off and, you know, two things happened. I met my son's father and I got a job at AAA. And then I started comparing my insides to my outsides. And then I realized when I started doing this, that there was some shame associated with certain parts of my life, like being molested from the age of 3 years old, several other sexual assaults that had been buried deep, deep, deep down within me. But when shame comes up, then all of these memories, trauma lives in the body. the body keeps score. So something will trigger you and remind you of something that happened, and then it will come back to your consciousness, and you could have some different kinds of effects of that. But I never had a negative impact about living in the projects until I started comparing where other people were living with where I was living. And they had a dining room, and they had a garage, and you don't have a dining room and a garage in the projects. You have community, you have love, you have foresight, you have friends, but all of those home structures, even though my mother did all she could to make home feel like home, even I remember one time I went to Louisiana when my dad died, and they had these big old giant flying roaches, and you step on them and they keep on going. I was like, when I got back to California to our little roaches, I was so glad to get back to our little roaches. Some things you like really appreciate when you go away. So, but having that kind of remembrance of the trauma that happened as a child and how you project that, and how a lot of work has to be done. That kind of work just doesn't go away. You can't put a Band-Aid on a bullet wound and think that it's going to get better. It takes time. Healing takes time. Healing takes time. Healing takes love. Healing takes support and love and community. So it's still in the process. I used to call myself a wounded healer, and now I call myself a healing healer, because I realize that if you're wounded, you will attract wounded people. And at 70 years old, I'm kind of sick of attracting wounded people. I want to attract people who really want to do something to help themselves be better and build back better, as the president says. And my work is specifically with African-American folks in general. I now work with couples, but also women. So that's the personal, and how my trauma was connected to addiction was that at 19 years old, I discovered work outside, I discovered men, and I discovered alcohol. And weed was in there, but it was just like a little bit. It started making me paranoid. Then at 24 years old, after I had my baby, I discovered cocaine. And, I did that for 5 years. And at 44 years old, I wound up in the residential treatment facility that led me to 12-step fellowships that really helped turn my life around and helped me to be able to see my wounds as just what they are, wounds, but that there was healing, and that I wasn't alone with that, and that healing was possible. One last little funny story about that. When we were in treatment, they took us to Cocaine Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous was there, but we weren't really hip to it. And so Cocaine Anonymous, there was no connection. People were talking about losing ranches and horses and, expensive cars. It's like, we ain't got none of this. It's like, where's our people at? Same thing with alcohol. They were talking about alcohol, right? And then we discovered Narcotics Anonymous, and we built and made and grew Narcotics Anonymous to have it be where we could have community and family together. So, I went there for several years. I don't attend meetings anymore, but, I still connected to my friends and family, and that those folks are important. So that's what I want to say about that part.
So, Gloria, could you get into, if you want to tie it to your own journey, but also give some examples of the kind of pain that drives people into alcoholism, drug addiction, or other addictions?
Sure. So my story is similar / a little different. I was born and raised in Fillmore. And in the summer of 67, I was a young teenager on Hippie Hill. And in 1967, that summer of love, the entire world came to San Francisco for the solid reason of getting high. It was no longer about the Golden Gate Bridge, Chinatown, and, White Tower and Twin Peaks or none of that stuff. The world was coming here to get high. Smoke marijuana, take LSD, pills, alcohol, whatever. And I was a young girl lying to my parents saying, we was going to Golden Gate Park for a field trip, right? But we were going to Hippie Hill. So my environment early became saturated with just abundance of, narcotics. And that word wasn't something familiar to me. It was just, here, drink this, smoke this, try this. And everything was yes at that point. Everything, yes. So fast forward to Superfly, 1970, 71, 72. I was friends with people who had scholarships who were all set up to go off to college when Superfly hit, and this whole nother world opened up of speakeasies and after hours and cocaine and champagne and, you know, just, and, you know, we at that time, young Black people thought everybody wanted to live this life, right? This was like the hit. And nobody knew in those days that even cocaine was addictive, right? You could go to parties and everybody would be at the parties, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs, it didn't matter because, you know, it was finally a drug that you could enjoy and it made you hip, slick, and cool. And, you know, there's something still in me that my shoes got to match, my dresses got to match. The downside is not having a lot of information and being misinformed about drugs and alcohol set a lot of people up for the one day having lots of painful experiences along the way that we were taught, you know, you don't tell nobody about that. You don't, you know, forget about that. If he's got another woman across town and he's paying them bills, you keep your mouth shut. You made your bed, now you lay in it. It don't matter how many women he got. He's paying bills, you hush. So I was groomed in that way. I saw women who, I heard things like a piece of man is better than no man at all. You just do what you got to do. You take care of the kids and you take care of the house and you keep your mouth shut. Even when they didn't say that, they lived it. Now, all the men didn't have women across town and all the men weren't living these double lives, but the ones who were in my immediate household, my father, my grandfathers, the uncles I was closest to, they were men with these double lives. So I got groomed early for a value system that incorporated, you know, take care of your kids and go to work and be a good woman and leave him alone. You leave that alone. Well, by the time I was by 1984, I'd had so much of that relationship hurt and sorrow that I didn't know I was burying, that at that time when the women across town showed up in me, I was finally in enough emotional pain that alcohol and drugs worked. I finally had the kind of pain that made them necessary to ease that pain. And in 1984, I crossed that. There's an imaginary line that people talk about that it doesn't say, okay, well, you're getting ready to get in some real trouble with this drinking and hanging out. You might want to pull back. It says, everybody wants to do this. You find it. There's nothing wrong. Well, I crossed that line in about 84, and I started to do things that I couldn't. And I was watching other people do things. I had a sister who my mother raised her children because of things that were going on with her in drugs. I had seen people, heard about people dying of drug overdoses, but they were heroin addicts. I'd seen people die of alcoholism. They were alcoholics. But I did not see people who were social using like I was at that time get into that kind of trouble. Well, I was groomed to be a solid mother, a loving woman. And when I saw me and others around me crumbling, and I saw people around me, ending up losing their children through CPS. I saw people around me losing their homes, losing their cars. I saw people around me going to jail, getting killed. I saw things around me that frightened me to my core. And I could not, my children were no longer in peace, right? They were really worried about their mother. I could see it in their eyes. I could feel it in them. I could not I would have committed suicide. I couldn't handle that. And and this marriage that I just thought was, we was really going to do it this time, right? We had been through hell and back. And that pain and sorrow of all of that sent me, it caused me to be suicidal. And that frightened me to a place that it sent me into treatment. And from there, I learned about 12-step programs, self-help programs that had what I had never had. And that was some life guide, a guide to that I could look at. The power of writing my feelings down and sharing them with another human being who was not saying, girl, hush, don't talk about that. Or that's stupid. Why are you saying that? Women who weren't looking at me like, who she thinks she is? She thinks she cute, and treat me bad because I looked like I looked. And then men who treated me bad because this wholesomeness I've always had. And to be for real, like this is not like something I do 9 to 5. I'm this all the time. So running into men and getting with men who are like, well, hell, I'm not doing this 24/7. I can do this enough to catch you, but I'm not fixing to keep all this up. This is too much. And then make the decision to move on, and then I move on. Just kept creating too much emotional trauma and injury and sorrow for me to handle on my own. The 12-step programs gave me some structure, gave me some guidance, and they gave me people who weren't treating me bad because, I had my own room at the age of 8. I had a mom and a daddy. I looked just like my mom and my daddy. They're obviously loving. They work hard. They worked every day, even though they had problems and issues. There was a lot of things, I call it community abuse that I suffered, that some of it I'm just now being able to articulate and admit that I had that level of suffering inflicted by the people that I loved in my community. So all those different layers, but again, I think the big thing with the 80s was having a big influence of Black people, a group that found out that church wasn't doing it, psychiatry wasn't doing it, medicine wasn't doing it, and that we were dying. And there was some place that we could land in this 12-step process that was about a lot of internal healing. That was a lot about connecting us to the spirit in us, to the God in us, and us to the community and to the world at large.
So that's very insightful, and it's interesting that you talk about the line that you crossed, and that's when it sounds like from what you were saying, you became connected or aware of your pain, and this became a narcotic thing to try and calm it.
Medicator.
Yeah, medicator. And that tends to answer a question of why in certain cultures people can use certain drugs and not get addicted, And I know some of it has got to do with they're natural, they don't have a lot of the chemicals in it, but it suggests that maybe there's also this fact that in a society in which so many things are happening to people, they see this as a way to escape out of certain painful things,
Well, I'm not sure that. So drugs and alcohol in and of itself are addictive, highly addictive substances. And so if a human being uses drugs or alcohol to the excess that they become addicted, that happens because every brain is the a normal, if you will, or wired brain, right? And so there may be communities that when they see themselves getting into trouble, they pull back. There may be communities that have things in place, support systems in place that they lean on that allow them to get a break in the action, if you will, where the addictions are concerned, and then regroup and start over. But the way substances work and the way the brains are created, if every human being has the possibility of crossing that line, everybody doesn't, or people cross it. In our cases, we crossed it rather, at the time that it was allotted for us to cross it, but we got to help quick. We couldn't hang out there long. It was against how we were raised, the love that we had been given by our parents and our community at large. And we were far away from what was expected of us. And what was expected of us was important to us.
So can both of you give some examples of trauma events that generally affect people, in this case, Black people, that can trigger drug addiction or alcoholism or other addictions? What are some of those? Some of those are buried in the examples you gave, but what are some others?
So I want to go back to the point that you made about some communities being addicted and other communities not being addicted. And I agree with Gloria too, because it's all like she talks about a biopsychosocial dilemma that happens to your biology, happens in your community, and the way you think about things. But a simple definition of addiction is an urge to do something that is hard to control or stop. And the difference with chemical dependency, which is the same as alcoholism, alcohol is legal and chemicals are not. Heroin's not legal, cocaine's not legal, fentanyl is legal, opiates are legal, and they are prescribed to certain groups of people more often than they are to us, because the racism in the medical field has doctors thinking that we can't take certain medicines because we will automatically become addicted. And that's an issue in that arena. We could be hurting, we could be really, really sick, but because they have certain biases about people of color, and they make up stories about that, and then they hang their hats on them, even though they're professional, and they operate through that guise that we will become addicted more than other people. Just like they say, we can sustain more pain than other groups. Or if Black people wouldn't eat certain things, then we wouldn't be as susceptible. It's like if you eat a whole bunch of fried chicken, regardless of what race you are, eventually you're gonna get high blood pressure, right? But they put those labels on us in a way that's different than other people. So now I forgot your question. Let me finish that answer.
What are some of the traumatic events or experiences that can lead someone to addiction of whatever form, especially alcohol and drugs? Give a number.
Okay, so the number one for me, the traumatic event is racism. That's a number one traumatic event. It's racism is at the top, and because of the biases that people are conditioned to, that cause us to deal with the microaggressions that we suffer every single solitary day. I live in an area that one of my girlfriends called Trumpville, right? And so when the elections were happening, all of those signs were out. And every time I looked at that, I felt some kind of way about that. It didn't cause me to go get loaded or nothing like that, but it still caused me to feel a certain kind of hurt. And then when I would go to the grocery store, and I had on my little Biden-Harris mask, the same people that looked at me when I had on my little plain blue mask no longer looked at me, right? And so I felt some kind of way about that. That was an arrow into microaggression. Then I just started getting, it was kind of passive aggressive, but kind of more aggressive than passive aggressive. Because then I would say to them, "Good morning, how are you?" And I still got my Biden mask. They would go like this and shake all up and everything, right? So racism, people's bias, both implicit bias and explicit bias. And explicit bias is where somebody is just actually afraid of you because of the way that you look, the color of your skin, the way you carry yourself, the way that you may speak. We do not fit into the white frame of femininity. It is thin, blue eyes, a thin nose, blonde hair, and a small frame, right? I ain't got no small frame. I'm big boned. My eyes are brown. My nose is pugged. My hair under this beautiful wig hat here is actually, I did make it blonde. So I do qualify in one of those areas of the blonde hair. But I think that, like Sister Sharon says, the system is designed to help people not see us. And if they do see us, then they are afraid of us. And so what that requires is that we have a sense of strength, and that is traumatic. And that we hold that in our bodies, long time wounds and injuries of microaggressions. I remember when I was in junior high school and I said, I'm going to be president one day. And many kids have this experience. And the teacher said, no, you probably should figure something else out. Right? Or somebody says, I'm going to be an attorney. And this white teacher will tell them, no, you don't have what it takes. What that does is that plants that trauma, but it also kind of says, you know what? Yes, I do. Let me show you. I can show you. But people will hold things, especially white people or people who have power over you, will tell you things that are not necessarily true about yourself. And depending on your community and where you come from, you will begin to, I believe some of those things. My mother did domestic work, and I thought for many years of my career, because I worked at AT&T, there was nothing she could tell me about corporate America and what was happening with people. And one day I didn't have anybody to go to. And I went to my mama, and she gave me all these pearls. Bam, feed them kind of people with a long handled spoon. Boom, don't tell everybody what you see, what you know. It's not that important. But I mean, I was like, dang, I should have came to this old lady a long time ago, right? So it didn't matter what she knew, is that I didn't have the sense to know that my mama had lived. She used to tell me, girl, I done forgot on accident more than you'll ever know on purpose. Don't take me for granted. And I started just getting her. Now I sound so much like her. Every time somebody says something, I say, my mama said, my mama said, my mama said. So my final thing about the trauma is that A, it lives in the body. B, the body keeps score. C, it's on a 3-pronged level. It's on the community, it's on the family, and it's on society, the system. And all of those work in collaboration together, from the media putting things in the paper that's not true. You know, when they had Katrina, you will see in the paper, white people will be taking things and they call that finding. Black people will be taking things and they call the same picture, called it looting. So all of those biases that they have against us and our people, we begin to believe those things about ourselves. That's called conditioning. And that type of conditioning causes the trauma. And that kind of trauma lives in our mind, body, and spirit until we have the wherewithal to say, you know what, that's not true about me. Or until we go to school and get some education about how trauma is and how it affects you. Trauma is an event, an experience, and the repercussions of that. And day-to-day trauma, day in and day out, then it begins to affect you on a level on your mind, body, and spirit day in and day out. So you have to have some healing. It will cause you to become fragmented, and it will cause you to become disintegrated, where you don't see or know who you are or what your capabilities are. That experience of that particular trauma will cause you to not be who you know yourself to be. Until we meet people like you, until we feel better about ourselves, until we are told that you could do it, you could do it, you could do it. So yeah, that's what I want to say about that part.
In your show last time, you talked about clean pain and dirty pain, and you were giving the example of racism as one of the leading things that inflict trauma and pain. And so you gave the example of someone who is told by their teacher, no, you can't fulfill your dream. And what I say about clean pain and dirty pain, and it depends on how you're wired, how you respond to that.
Yep.
Because some are wired to be in belief of themselves, and when they're told you can't do this. It isn't just that they do it to prove the other wrong, but they believe in themselves and they're saying no. And then there are others who are more defined by how they're viewed by others, some of which is self-perception that comes through racism, some of which has to do with how you're structured as a human being. I'm an astrologer, so I can tell you there's some things about human growth and development that are very important to know. One of which is some people are social oriented to the point that they're very shaped by what others think about them, especially family, people who are close to them. And that's not a weakness. That's just the way they're structured. Malcolm X was structured that way. I've done his astrological chart. It's family oriented. My brother was structured that way. You know what I mean? So what others thought of him, especially family, or what happened to him through family, could have a more negative effect than someone who was more of a world person or someone that was more other directed. It doesn't mean one was stronger than the other. So, you know, your point about clean pain is it's a question of how you face a crisis, whether you turn a lemon into lemonade or whether it becomes distasteful and you move on. And this is not blaming a person for how they respond, because we're all set up the way we are set up, not based on racism, but based on the structure of our inner being to be the way we are. And so that point is very, very important. Now, you give the overall example of racism as a key cause for triggering a lot of this internal pain. And there were others that you've talked, when I've talked to you about them, both of you, about them before, that are triggers. Just give me a few others that really disrupt a person's being. You've given a couple yourself, but any others that disrupt a person's being that can drive them to try and seek outside answers.
Right. So sexual abuse and sexual assault, definitely. The average young Black girl who experiences, especially from a family member, any sexual abuse, any sexual misuse, is told, don't tell nobody else. Don't tell nobody else. Do not speak about this. And we're all groomed to whatever goes on in my house stays in my house. The pain and the anguish of losing a parent, whether it's that you never had that particular parent or whether that parent denied you. There are many young men and young women or young men who bring children in the world who never admit that they fathered those children. The loss of a parent through death, through sickness, a loss of a parent through substance abuse, mental illness. All of those things cause a horrific loss. And if you're not surrounded by people who are creating a forum for you to speak what you're feeling, for you to express what you're feeling, to not make you bad for having feelings, which dates back to being captured in Africa. When we showed emotion, that was one of the first things that could get you thrown over the ship, because you were causing those men to see how inhumane they were. So to express humanity and emotion the way that we do is one of the probably our biggest challenge with expressing ourselves as the human beings we are, period. Like you said, my own personal structure, my own tenderheartedness, my own desire to be socially accepted everywhere by everybody was in fact those things were leading me to avenues and venues that I was going to suffer a lot of trauma and hurt and sorrow, a lot of rejection, a lot of whatever. And having those kinds of experiences, moving through those experiences in life and not really knowing what to do with them, where to go with them. And those voices that were the closest to me, the men in my life, other people in my life saying things that further beat me down psychologically, emotionally, verbally, one day made picking up something to alter how I felt easy. And access and access and availability. Being in San Francisco in the summer of love in 1967, experiencing this huge influx of drugs, and then in the 80s, having every major city across the country flooded with heroin, cocaine. You all know, and a lot of us who are older saw, where we had a church, 2 or 3 churches on every block. By the 80s, it was 3 or 4 liquor stores on every block. It was not churches who were building community. All those, that targeted experience, being in that war that was declared on us that we did not realize we were in, also caused just pain and sorrow that we're still staggering from.
Now that part I want to hold, because that requires some background discussion. But this other that you're dealing with is extremely important. And one of the examples you gave was the enslavement thing, where not showing your feelings was not only a defense mechanism, it was a resistance mechanism. Because when you were whipped 100 lashes, the average Black person didn't cry. The average one, a lot did, but a lot didn't. Why? Because it was a form of resistance. It was saying, you can't break me, you know? And that became something that helped to carry us through. But it becomes a weakness. It's a weakness also because we're also covering up pain. You know, and that also is carried over in terms of the whippings that we get in families that are carryovers of slavery. And I know in my own case that the way I resisted was to laugh. That was to tell my mother that it wasn't working. You know what I mean? And that may well be a Leo response too, because I've heard of some others who are Leos who do that, but I think it was just a response. And my brother told me not long before he died, when you did that, I got harder whippings. I said, why didn't you tell me? I wasn't doing this to put it on you. I was doing this to get it off myself. You know what I mean? But one of the things that did was it led me to sometimes not be too clear about how I felt about this. In other words, I was so tough. I didn't like getting whipped. Get that straight. But I could also cover up some of my feelings and hide from myself what I was really feeling. You know what I mean? So that was a part of it. But, you know, this biblical thing, you know, when Blacks decide to take on Christianity, contrary to popular opinion, not on the plantation, it wasn't forced on us. We made our own choice. We dropped our culture into the Black church. And one of them, I was talking to you all about this yesterday. One of them was our view of Jesus. In the beginning, Jesus was like someone swallowing swords. It was Shango. It was a warrior god. It was also the belief that he had made a sacrifice for us. That's an African belief, a sacrifice. But it was this. They said they pierced him in the side and he didn't, and nailed him to the cross, and he didn't utter a word, you know? Now, that isn't biblical. Biblical is Jesus hung on the cross, crucified, pierced in the side, and he said, my Father, why have you forsaken me? What was happening is that person hanging on the cross was that Black person who had been whipped. That was their view of Jesus, that this Jesus was tough. He hung in there and he was tough for us. That was their belief. So that's a whole thing that we got to understand. And, you know, in terms of the ways in which we resisted, that was also the toughness of a slave revolt. That was the toughness of people keeping their mouth shut when they knew that if they opened it, someone's life could be lost. You know what I mean? And so all of this of not telling and all of this is also this false pride of keeping it to yourself. And there's some things we should do. I would never do Oprah. You ain't getting me on Oprah to tell the world everything about my family. I'm sitting on a plane and some white person's telling me everything about their life. I'm not doing that. It's none of your business. So there is a side where privacy is a necessary and good thing. And then there's a side where you're hiding stuff from yourself. And
that's eating you alive. That's eating you alive. When the information about us or our experiences which is a core element of any kind of addiction, when it turns on you and it is now eating you alive, that is when we're in trouble.
Yeah.
So, and us being able to go to people that we could, one, first and foremost, like you said, trust, who weren't going to go blabbing everything all over the world. Two, that could actually understand. The problem that we've had in terms of getting help is the mental health field is full of people, practitioners, but how many am I going to go to that I won't have to explain what high side means, or what I'm going to have to explain? I won't have to explain, any word that is exclusive to us and how we communicate. People who go to mental health. I became a social worker because I went to get help, and I cried. I was on a bus. I went to Marin County. I cried all the way to San Francisco on that bus because my brain said, you really messed up. If this is all you got and this is what you got to look forward to, you are screwed. I felt outright screwed. And I went home and cried myself to sleep. I got up at 2:00 in the morning and completed my application for San Francisco State for the social work program, because I said, I know that I can support one Black woman trying to get clean and trying to get herself together better than that woman could ever support anybody. And I told myself, if I just was able to support one mother, then that was fine for me. Well, you know how it is in helping professions, when our hearts want to be of service, we build nations, which is something I didn't understand about us as a people. We don't build a family, we don't build a person, we build nations. So there's a nation now that I can look at in my family, in my children, in my children's friends, in my grandchildren and my grandchildren's friends, that are all impacted positively by the fact that I know what suffering is. I have suffered, I got help, and I chose to live my life as somebody who can be a vessel to support others.
I want to go back to the reasons of trauma, the evidence of trauma. So some people may have heard of Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which was a study that was done in 1998 between Kaiser Hospital and the Center for Disease Control. And they surveyed 17,998 Kaiser patients. They were white, they were college educated, they lived in San Diego, they were married, and they had health insurance. And this study revealed some of the key essence of trauma that happens to children before the age of 18. One was experiencing the violence, abuse, and neglect. Two, witnessing violence in the home or the community. Three, having a family member attempt or die by suicide. It also included a child's environment, like substance abuse problems, mental health problems, and instability due to separation or a household member being in jail. But it was also revealed or found out that, what if you're not married or white or live in San Diego or have health insurance? So it realized that they left out a whole group of people that look like us. So they did another study that included environmental factors, like, have you ever been discriminated against? Have you ever been bullied? Have you witnessed a high level of violence in your community? And so that able to open it up. And this woman from San Francisco, her name is Dr. Nadine Burke. She's the first Surgeon General for the state of California, and her whole emphasis and her whole project and study is about ACEs and how it impacts children of color in general. And she started with little children in Hunters Point. So there's a TED Talk, Nadine Burke, Dr. Nadine Burke, 17 minutes, will help you really understand. If you don't know anything about adverse childhood experiences, you could take a look at that video and it will really help you. And then you were also talking about holding stuff in. Some more research that I've done has found that Black women die 46% more from congestive heart failure due to holding in these secrets and having grief, unexpressed grief and loss. I said last week and a lot of times, I'm the president. I have a shirt and the mug of ain't nobody got time for that club, right? If we stop, then what happens to our families? What happens to our children? What we know is that they will go on, but what we believe is that they won't. And what we need to know and understand that taking care, and I know we're going to get into taking care of our part, but if we don't stop, if we don't rest, you know, sometimes when I'm traveling, I have so much to do, get ready, do this, do that. And my brain will develop a migraine. With the migraine headache, you got to stop. You can't see. So you have to lay down and be quiet. And so that's how I become in tune with my body to say, I'm trying to do too much at this time. I do less now that I'm retired and I work from home and I have my own business from home. But when I was in the community, driving back and forth from Antioch to San Francisco every day and just trying to help people and giving more of myself to other people than I had to give to myself, it caused me to have conversion disorder. That means I lost the use of my arm. I couldn't raise my arm above my head, and the pain was so significant. And that driving back and forth every single solitary day, in addition to the conversion disorder, like Gloria talked about, and this is in recovery with 30 years clean, I thought about killing myself because it was just too much. I knew how to I was a good tell other people how to take care of yourself, but I was not a good walking model of that. Right. And so it was important for me to step back and realize what's important to me. I want to be here for my grandchildren. I want to be here for myself first, but I also want to be here for my grandchildren to be able to watch them grow up and and have children. I have an 11-year-old. And so I said, I want to see your kids one day. He said, oh, Nana, are you still going to be here? I said, well, let's figure this out. Like if I'm 70 now, and we got it down. I said, okay, you got to have kids by the time you're 30 and I'll be 95 and I still can hang. He said, okay, now, okay, we can make that happen. I said, go to school, get a house, get a wife. Don't have a bunch of miscellaneous babies now. Go to school, get a house, get a wife, just like your dad. So by the time you get out of school, be 24, you find a woman in college, you marry her, then you can have grandbabies. Great grandbabies. Okay. He said, okay, Nana. Okay. Can I play my game now? Can you give me some more time on my game? I was being manipulated, I think, but it felt so good.
Now, before you gave a overall definition of drug addiction, alcoholic addiction, and in discussion with both of you, you talked about addiction being a biosocial disorder that affects the brain. You've touched on this a little bit. What do you mean also by an addictive personality? Go into more of what addiction is and this idea of a biosocial disorder, an addictive personality.
Before you go into that part, Gloria, let me just give the classified definition of that, and then you could go into biosocial social. Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. So it's classified. Other elements of addiction are gambling, food, sex, money, and power. That's one that I think it really has power. You can be addicted to power. They call it narcissism, but you can still like being addicted to power. Telling people
can I make a point here?
Yes, sir.
Western Aryan culture, European culture is power driven. And that's the whole drive of the culture.
Yes.
It's control, and it's considered normal, you know, but it is the basis for all abnormality, and especially how it affects other people who they end up trying to control. Go ahead.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. Right.
So it's classified in many psychosocial terms as a dis-ease. We call it a dis-ease of the mind, body, and spirit. But it also affects the brain's reward, motivation, and memory functions. Someone with an addiction will crave a substance or other behavioral habits, and they'll ignore other areas of their life to fulfill or support those desires. So if you have a goal in mind and you have tasks associated with that goal, if you're living on it with an addictive personality, then those priorities kind of get moved to the backside. Now, if you are a functional addict like we were, you have priorities, you have dreams, you have goals, they get moved to the back, but you act like, oh, that's not really that important right now. That's not you moving or changing your goal. That's your addiction saying, I am a priority, and you will move when I say you will move, and you do not have a choice about that. I said that it would grab me by my ovaries. I could be sitting and made a promise I'm never gonna get loaded again, or I'm not gonna get loaded again, or I just don't want to do it. Thursday, payday Thursday, it would grab me by my ovaries and twist. Say, well, you can go get some drugs on credit now, because you know you got real good credit. At the end there, I was trying to sell savings bonds. The drug dealer say, now, Brian, you know this ain't no good. I said, you know I'm coming back for that, though, because I'm a good addict, and I keep my word. So go ahead about the biosocial glory, then I'll come back to talk about some signs that people are addicted and what those behaviors look like.
Right. Well, you just did it. You just described the biosocial, the description of how the brain works with addiction. There's an imaginary line there. It's a different place for any human being because, every human being has something that's a little bit different from another. But that imaginary line, the beginning of drugs are just for fun and excitement. They're accessible, like alcohol is accessible. Most people coming up, especially in this country, your first sexual experience is aided by alcohol. Your first prom, your first major celebration, you still sips out the beer or wine when your parents are entertaining or whatever. I sure did. So there's this social acceptability and a social pressure to push humans, especially here, into drinking in relationship to other life events that, it's a built-in comfort mechanism that our brains are receptive to, because the brain just knows it's been triggered, and it's been triggered in a way that the brain internalizes as exciting, and it just wants that exciting / euphoric experience again. And it just knows more. Once that part of the brain gets awakened, that part just knows more. So whatever the thing is that's bringing you the excitement and the comfort at the time, whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's sex, whether it's gambling, all of those areas all entail those other symptoms that come with it, like, lying about the bills, reorganizing the money so that, the whatever the craving is can get addressed. Whatever the thing that I'm craving can be addressed. Lying to people when we start to see ourselves fall off our marks, lying to ourselves, to the people watching us. We start to say things. Lying, dishonesty is a big symptom. We start to say things like, oh, no, I didn't say I was going to buy that. I knew I wasn't going to do that. Oh, no, I didn't say I was going to pay you back on Thursday. I knew I wasn't going to get paid till Saturday. All those kinds of things start to overtake anybody's life who has crossed that imaginary line.
So some signs that somebody's addicted, here are a few of them. Number one, changes in their personality behavior, like Gloria's talking about, lack of motivation, irritability, and easily being agitated. Now, we're in a pandemic, and so, pandemic behavior can also look like that because, people are more prickly with one another and less sensitive and less kind. So if you're on the verge of being addicted, but you've got this instant irritability due to PTSD of the pandemic, that could be a factor. So I wanted to throw that in there. Bloodshot eyes, a frequently bloody nose, shakes, a little small tremor like that You know, if you notice yourself having a little tremor like that more often than not, that could be a sign that you're moving closer to having difficulty with alcohol being digested in your body. Changes in your daily routine. Where normally you used to get up, wash the dishes, straighten up a little bit, and make up your bed or take a bath. And the more you become addicted, those things no longer become a priority. Priority is finding ways and means to get to use more. And more means whatever kind of more. Unusual need for money and extreme financial problems. Your credit score doesn't matter. I don't matter if I got a 400 credit score. I ain't gonna never buy no house, no way. Things that used to matter to you, that you used to think about, no longer have a priority. A key one is an inability to stop. That was one for me, that no matter how many times I promised myself that I wasn't going to do it anymore, that I just lacked the ability to stop. Changes in your mood, appetite, and sleep, also pandemic related, but also changes in mood and appetite and sleep is a key factor of depression. So you also want to watch that as well. Going to bed 2 hours before your normal sleep time, or waking up. I can't say waking up before 2 hours before your normal sleep time, because I wake up at 3:30 every morning. But if that's not your regular routine, then that's where it could be troublesome for both depression and signs of addictive disorder, as well as your appetite, eating more or less than you used to eat. Also pandemic related. Continuing despite negative consequences. Continuing despite negative consequences. That is one that's really, really, really key. Denial. It's not really that bad. You know, at least I'm not using heroin. Mine was that got me. They invented, so addicts have different class status. Like heroin is kind of like the bottom of the rung, but crack is like the bottom of that, and freebase is like upper echelon. That's just how crazy that stuff is. So I was a freebase addict. And just before I got into treatment, crack hit the street. And I would have been out of my mind with that instant, you know, just getting anywhere, a little bit, a whole bunch of stuff like that. So I always say that God just picked me up by the nape of my neck and said, girl, no, you don't have what it takes to be out here doing that, and plop me where I needed to be. And then engaging in risky behaviors, saying or doing things that you normally wouldn't do, that were outside of your theoretical framework, outside of the realm of your value system. Like you would say, I really wasn't raised like that, like Gloria pointed out, right? And my mother said to me, when I got really, really bad, just before I went into treatment, she said, you know what, baby? You can lie to a whole bunch of people, but when you start lying to yourself, you know you got some trouble. And I'm your mama, and I know when you're lying. I just don't point it out all the time. Oh my God. The next few highs were just a mess. And soon after that, I was in treatment. And then finally, feeling preoccupied with the substance or the behavior. So being in a drug culture, in the beginning, it's a fun behavior. You're hanging around people, you're passing it, and you know, it's talking, and that's all you know. But pretty soon it becomes very combative and not very friendly, and there is absolutely no love, because you become selfish and self-centered and not caring for the other individual. All you care about is finding ways and means to get more.
Now, going back to the symptoms of trauma, I just wanted to add one,
Okay.
which is real key. It tied to racism, which is rage. And I think either men or women can experience that. I think men really experience it. And under a patriarchy in which you're supposed to be the head of the family, and you know, you're supposed to be the provider, and you know, you got all these definitions of manhood, and then the system is out to crush it. And then you see all the racism around you. There's external rage against the system, but then there's internal rage within yourself. And part of that internal rage can also involve blaming yourself, you know, and especially if a person is someone who feels that they have not accomplished everything that they want to accomplish in life, there can be the blame of self. And so alcohol and drugs become a narcotic to try and soothe that rage. which is eating you up on the inside. And I just want to offer a clue when we get to solutions. Often under circumstances in which the person either isn't able or doesn't see, or for certain generations, it wasn't possible for them to direct the rage in ways that could be healthy. You know what I mean?
So yeah, the flip side of rage / anger for every human being is pain. So rage and anger are the socially acceptable emotions, right? That we're encouraged to express. But if you wake up and you look at somebody and you say, God, I am hurting so bad, I don't even feel like I can breathe. There are very few places or people you can go to and say that and then start crying. That Denzel in Glory, that scene where Denzel is beat just horribly, and that one tear, he bites his lip, but that one tear falling is like expresses thousands of years of pain, right? But because of the social acceptability for anger and rage and the denial of pain, it sets up that place where the average human being can't sort out their emotions with some real direction because of those kinds of messages that don't allow us to feel exactly what we're feeling. We are allowed to feel what is socially acceptable for everybody to accept, not what is actually happening for us or the reasons. I cried myself to sleep for 5 years because my husband cheated. Well, I couldn't tell nobody that. I couldn't, because when I did say that, everybody said, oh, girl, that's stupid. Shut up. Don't let him know. You don't have to. That's crazy. Well, it wasn't crazy. That was my experience. That was truly my experience. And to not be able to have a place that I could express it and have it validated was a source of pain that took me even lower than I thought I could go.
Mm-hmm. Now, what I want to do is get into more of the societal things, historical things, political things, social things, because often when we're talking about addiction, it's all personal. And that is set up by the society, because then it takes off of the society the onus of how you caused this. You know what I mean? Someone like Oprah could have all the weeping and sorrow. She did good work on getting people to open up. But don't be talking too much about the FBI's role in this, or slavery's role in this, or other things. Your sponsorship is gone. Your little $1 billion ain't going to be made, let alone two. So we were preparing for this last night, and you brought out something that really triggered me to really see how important it was to tie this into this overall thing. And it is the two historical periods that we need to discuss when we're talking about addiction, but oppression in general, that give rise to this. One is the period of enslavement. The other is the post-1968 period. And in talking, we were talking about how each one contributed to this problem of addiction and other problems that come under the label of oppression. But particularly this post-68 period brought on some special things. So let's talk about these two periods and some of the ways in which that has affected our people and can lead to some of this addiction, but also other forms of oppression as well.
Well, both of those periods have horrific pain, emotional pain. The fact that even today, where the enslavement process is concerned, you can't open any book unless somebody's had to fight a publisher to find the description as African human beings who either survived or did not survive an enslavement process. You cannot, you have to fight hard to find us historically described as full red-blooded human beings. And that injury, that separation of us from our humanity is a source of pain that started with our capture and continues today. I call it Plantation Living 101. There's all kinds of elements that make it alive and well from that time to this that hurt us all day, every day. And we are so traumatized, we don't always have a way of articulating that. I raised my hand in classrooms at San Francisco State in the political science department and said, aren't you referring to African human beings who were captured? And professors turned red and the research doesn't say that. I said, well, I'm a little older than these kids in this class. I don't need the research to say that for that to be true, right? So that kind of and I taught my children or my grandchildren, you raise your hand. Now, I know they didn't all do it, but that's the kind of healing and work that has to be focused on for us to honor the damage that is still at work. The other thing with where the 60s are concerned, we all remember the influx of us moving about the country that changed the face of the nation, right? We put service industries we created and buffed up and built service industries that were floundering when we started moving in the 40s and 50s from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and all of that, right? We created a United States that had never even been witnessed before as we started to move. Well, as we moved and we developed families, we started having babies. Some of us came with babies, but we started having babies. We created kids who went to college. We created kids who went to medical school, who had degrees and all kinds of things. And because they didn't get those big jobs like the white kids were getting, we had to build those businesses in major cities for us to flourish. Shoemakers, cleaners, restaurants, cafes, record stores, music, entertainment, all of that. We were people with 2 suitcases that left the South. We built all that. And for jealous-hearted white folks to look up one day and say, what the hell? They were so traumatized and they were so jealous and they were so insecure that the massive distribution of drugs over this entire country, they believed then and they believe now, was mandatory. There was no way little Black children, little Black teenagers could be equal to Johnny and Bobby in Yale and in Harvard and in San Francisco State at that time. And so that massive distribution of drugs all over this entire country was the necessary weapon to wipe out the massive build and restructure of the civil rights movement. That was the core war that they had to win by any means necessary. And us not understanding how powerful we are, how beautiful we are, how courageous we are, made us willing and made us accept, made it easy. We had that pain of loss and all those jobs, all that service industry that we had built and we were really doing well, and have all those other sources of employment start to go to other countries, start to disappear, and us wake up depressed, full of anxiety, full of fear, full of hurt, full of sorrow, because by then too, we weren't going back to Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and Texas. We were at home in our own way, in homes, in home communities that we had built the way we needed them to function so that we could survive. And to have that be in San Francisco, especially, and like other major cities, we woke up one day and Fillmore was white. You couldn't find us in the daytime with a flashlight. That's the stuff that we're all still working through today, but that just didn't happen in San Francisco. It was Los Angeles, it was Chicago, New York, Philadelphia, all over the place. And so that kind of hurt and sorrow is what we're moving through, and what we've made a commitment to get past, to get through, to honor, to heal, and to move through today.
Yeah, one of the things I think is really important about the enslavement process is that it was horrible. And it was so horrible that no description of it has really described just how horrible it was. And enslaved blacks would call it the bullwhip days. Every now and then, if you read a slave narrative, they would talk about, this was terrible. What we went through was terrible. But the majority of the narratives would be the good masters and the bad masters. It wasn't all bad, you know what I mean? But that was not the reality that Black people faced. So one of the things that happens at the end of enslavement is what usually happens with people who have undergone oppression. Japanese Americans underwent the concentration camp experience. You don't talk about it, you know what I mean? And so that was one of the things, because it was so horrible, and you could understand why they wouldn't. Because there's some parts of family narratives that you don't really know. And it's good you didn't, you know, because it was just that bad.
Yeah,
you
they
know?
protected us.
Yeah.
They protected us. I grew up hearing that my grandmother worked for decent white folks. I remember hearing all through my life, the people who were the happiest when I looked around were the people who worked for what was called decent white folks, meaning the people who would pay them after their work, would give them all their hand-me-down clothes, would send them home with food. Those were decent white folks. And our people who worked for them came out more well-rounded, more spiritually fit, more generous, and more giving than the ones who did not have that experience.
Which usually wasn't true, because the reality is, who organized the Klan? It was these so-called good white people, you know what I mean? And the ones you're working for, it's new slavery. You know, what you're doing is, so you're up in somebody's house. It was the same thing that was happening with the house slave. And so that was the story, that there were these good white people, but you really couldn't find any. Where were they? You know what I mean?
Right.
But, you know, so enslavement, there were things about it we didn't want to talk about, but we also came out of enslavement with our humanity intact but scarred. And that's a part of this resilience thing that we have. Now, this post-68 period, you know, the point you were making when we were talking last night, very important point, that we were hit in ways that we were not prepared for. And these were powerful external forces. I've discussed this on this show before, but it's important to put it within the context of addiction, but also in the context of the nuances of oppression that occur as a result of that. These external forces had to do with economic forces that, you know, disaggregated and disorganized us, that weren't particularly aimed at us, but had the greatest harm to us. Deindustrialization, taking jobs out of the country. That wasn't so we wouldn't have jobs. That was so white people who ran the economy would make more money by shipping all their manufacturing outside the country, which was a stupid move, because for short-term gain, there's been long-term pain for them. China has risen faster, and they have helped promote it. And then they're going to run around here and create the anti-Chinese hysteria. You know, China's going to rise anyway, but you promoted their rise. But this had a disproportionate effect on us, because those jobs that remained went to the suburbs. Mm-hmm. And so we couldn't get to the suburbs. And if we did, we couldn't get a job. And so that is the first thing. And that has the biggest effect on breaking down families. But then all these other external forces hit us. And they are largely under the framework of globalization. And so the fact that the government is no longer in the business of low-income housing, you know, That's a part of privatization. Everything that's being built is being built for the rich. So you've got a lot of homeless people who are working because they can't afford to pay for a house. And then your point about redevelopment breaking up communities. So what happens when Blacks move into the North? We bring in Southern African-based culture, extended family communities, where every elder was in charge of you. Brianna was proud to be born where she was. Everybody was pretty much proud to be born where they were because you had whole communities looking out for you.
Yeah.
You know, I pointed out before, I busted the old lady's woman down the block from me in Fillmore. She whipped me when I got home. I got whipped by my mother. You know
exactly.
The point is, that was an extended family community. When the drugs are dropped and everything else, then what happens is, what happens to the community, not just the drugs, but all the other things that happen, is that we have what God's told me is a choice between two cultures. These forces that hit us put us now in a position where the younger generation is put in a position of choosing between this mad Euro-American culture that's blasted to them 24/7 on television and in every other kind of way, which is corporate-based and money-based and individualistic-based, and is also heavily pushing violence. And one of the things you talked about, Brianna, was the addiction to games. And if you look at a lot of these games, what are these games about? A lot of them violence, you know what I mean? And movies that are coming in, Scarface, which a lot of hip hoppers say was a major influence on them as drugs come in and businesses are disrupted, Black businesses are destroyed, Black communities are destroyed. Then what ends up happening is the employer of choice becomes, the pusher, the drug dealer. And so, and some people are putting elders on drugs, you know what I mean? So the younger people are doing that, and it's not their fault in that it's not their intention. But the key point is what's behind this. In addition to the economic forces, it is the fact that there was a Black liberation movement that defeated Southern segregation, that ended the denial of the right to vote, that defeated what had happened in post-Reconstruction in 1876. In the San Francisco area, you probably don't know it, but we put together the only successful freedom movement in the North during both the Civil Rights period and the Black Power period. We defeated a whole economic power struggle. What ended up happening, and there was resistance all over the country, Black Panther Party, various groups. There was a systematic move to dismantle this. And so the counterintelligence program, COINTELPRO, low intensity operations, which is put together by a guy named General Kitson, low intensity and peacekeeping operations. They targeted me 3 times for assassination, killed Malcolm, killed King, knocked off the Black Panther Party. This was war. And this war is still going on. And so when our people look at the drug situation, we're often looking, most of us know it was put in our community. And by the way, some of us know they put guns in our community. In LA, they would bring in train loads of guns and leave them. You know what I mean? And encourage that. And in fact, whenever there was moves, whether it was in the hip hop movement or political movements, Fred Hampton in Chicago, to heal the rift with the gangs, to provide unity, boom, he's killed. You know what I mean? Or the gangs in Chicago that align with Martin Luther King, Black Stone Rangers, that become the Black Stone Nation. And they are with King's movement after he's assassinated on the Poor People's Campaign. They're funded, they're identified, and killed off. Understand? So this is war. And as a result of that, the addiction crisis, I saw Lao Tzu put up here a comment that this same thing happened in China. Yeah, because it is a part of control, putting you back under control. So then we're in a period that God told me is a choice between two cultures. These forces that hit us put us in a position of choosing between our culture and theirs unconsciously, because a lot of us don't even know we have a culture. And most who have looked at this period don't understand this is the outcome. Because, by the way, this was not intended. Let me just say this, because we ascribe everything to the smart white man. he didn't think we had a culture. So though he knew putting drugs in the community would introduce a violent, savage culture, he knew that. But he was not out to destroy your culture. He didn't think you had one. You understand?
Exactly.
And some of us don't. A lot of us do, but some of us don't.
Yeah.
These are unintended consequences. So the point is, we see behavior now in the Black community we've never seen before.
Yeah.
We can't attribute this to slavery.
Yeah.
Some of this behavior was already there. Some of the stressors that cause alcoholism, drug addiction, you've identified, one of which is incest. There's a direct line to slavery on that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But the point is, now we're seeing other behavior that has got to do with these forces that have hit our community that we also have to address. And what are some of those that you see? Those are behavior patterns either not existing before or not as serious as then as they are now.
So the big one is the way that drugs attacked the Black woman and took her out of the family system. The Black woman, I've heard one of my friends say, his baby could wake up at 2:00 in the morning crying because his baby's hungry, but he can't do nothing for his baby but give him to his wife so that she can put that baby to her breast, right? That ability for Black women to nurture and take care of us and each other, when it was attacked by dope, it left us, just staggered. Our children had to, worse than being latchkey, our children were left to fend. Our grandmothers and great grandmothers were trying to step in. Many of them were still working. And to not have the foster care system full of our children, right? Full of our children. All of those hits, if you will, all of those attacks have served to injure our communities in a way that, we're the kind of people, I said this last night, our wiring has us groomed for love wars. We fight to take care of one another. We fight to feed each other. We fight to socialize with each other. We're not wired for a fight to destroy. We don't know a whole lot about that. So having us wake up in this world that was created just for us in this way has us staggered, because we're having to sort out what's true in us, what automatically operates in us, and how we can keep it in operation without, like what Brianna said, without it wiping the Black woman out, and without it separating us from the Black man in a way that we just find ourselves like we don't even have a comeback. Like the unity and the love and the abilities that we possess in us being together is being challenged right now in a way that we don't know we don't know a lot. We know what we've all done personally to survive and to get through, but turning this, you said that you taught me this, one of my first lessons from you was, this nation is designed to shut down systems, wipe out Black Panther Party, the Black church, whoever, but it cannot mess with one mind at a time. And that's where we're at our strongest. When we reach out with each other and pull each other in, we create a nation just within that one-to-one experience. And now, being able to do that.
In terms of resistance, now you have, for example, one big movement, and it has really been the awakening moment for the hip hop generation, is the Black Lives Matter movement. And one of the things that has happened, because we have a culture that we created in enslavement, I call it New African. and it's deep down inside the soil and inside of our souls. And so when we go into a crisis mode, because at various periods in our people's history, there are crises and new challenges, and we have to come up with responses to it. And so in this particular case, this is a particularly devastating one. And one of the responses that we had before to these crises was we would throw forward movements with individual leaders. And these leaders would come forward with plans, the Marcus Garvey movement, the Black Freedom movement in the 60s in the South, King, SNCC, CORE, these movements, and in the North, the Nation Islam, in terms of the healing that they did. But what's happened is the youth have figured something out. And what they figured out is the organic response to a system that is attacking you wholesale has got to be a massive response of multiple groups and multiple leaders. And that's the Ella Baker thing of group-centered leadership. So there are answers, and that's one that put Trump out of the White House. So that is coming up. But at the same time, we got other problems we got to address. One we were talking last night is the rising suicide rate. We are still healthier internally. Black males are stronger, and Black females, than white males or white females. And one of the best indicators of that is suicide. We have a lower suicide rate. Mm-hmm. And we should have the highest. Native Americans have a high suicide rate, and it ain't knocking them because they face genocide. They're on reservation. You want to talk about oppression? Groups more oppressed than them. They knocked off 90% of them. They're coming back, but they're living on reservations without water, without electricity, with nothing. You hear me? So I understand why suicide is going to be higher with them, and they're conscious when they're doing it, drinking themselves to death and stuff like that. But the key point is what's happened with these forces that have hit us is it's affected the quality of life of Black folks, and particularly younger Black folks. But this is across the board in American society. You can now say that the younger generation of just about all groups, except for probably a few. I would think with Jews, it would probably not be true. There are a few exceptions you can make here, but by and large with whites and Blacks, for example, the life situation of younger Blacks, unless there's some qualitative changes made, is going to be worse than the life situation of their parents. For example, the average young person is going to find it hard to buy a house, especially if they're living on the East or West Coast, the Midwest, some areas of the South, but it's going up. You know what I mean? Right. And that's because now people are put on starvation wages. My father could work as a longshoreman and buy a house that cost $5,000. Mm-hmm. That was close to what he made in a year, Now people are working on $20,000 a year, So that life circumstance. So we were talking about the rise in suicide rates. We still have lower rates than any other group, but among 7 to 11 years old, I pointed this out on previous shows, the rate is higher among Blacks, 7 to 11-year-olds. That has never been the case. Since when do 7-year-olds kill themselves? And some of this death, Black male death, is by strangulation. How can you strangle yourself to death?
Hanging.
How can you do that? And why would you do it? Because, and Brianna, we were talking about this yesterday, and you can give some indicators on this. There's a saying in the Black community, I'm not afraid
to die.
I'm afraid to live.
Yeah.
The certainty of life is in question because every younger person knows people who are dead. And they know probably some close calls for themselves. And these are circumstances that have been created by the state, by corporate America, by the FBI, by the CIA, by institutions that are running this country that are driving this group of people, young people, into the ground. And that's also why, they're stuck in jail and come out of jail more likely to go back. Whereas in Europe, if you go to jail, you come out,
you're free.
You got a house that is to rent, you got a job, you've been trained for something. because it's been geared for white people, and blacks happen to be in Europe, so they benefit from that. But here it's set up so you go back, because what they got for you is either the military, it is doing something on the streets or death, except for those young blacks who choose another way, which is an educational way to go to college, or, and a large number do, more in college than in prison, or who have a skill, because everybody don't need to go to college, but they need a skill. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So these shifts of the choice between two cultures, and which is then manifesting in different behavior patterns. This is another one I want to throw out. I was in a study session, and I've mentioned this on a previous show, when in the 70s, I was undergoing a lot of change and transformation. And it was a black woman who I would go to in the morning to her apartment on Divisadero Street. Her name was Helen Wolfo. It turned out my first wife and them were friends. This was a time before, actually it was the late 60s. It was before I met my first wife. And she had had a degree. She had been a social worker. And then she went to work in the post office. But she was an intellectual. So I would go and do readings with her, white books, because she wasn't into black books. But the key point she made was an observation of a change that she saw in the black community. And this is a change that's a minority. It's a very small group. But that this should exist at all, and this ties in, Brianna, to your research, and you can piggyback on this, is that she saw within a sector of young people, but this is in the late 60s, a sense of nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
A sense that I'm nothing, you're nothing, we're nothing. That's not a majority. That's a very small minority. But that should exist at all is telling you something. And Brianna, when we were talking, you were doing some research on that. That's an indicator of that. What's some of that?
Okay, so so I'm always looking and studying. Let me get my share right here. Okay, there we go. Adverse childhood experiences, and so since it came out, there are so many more levels to it. And in 2015, UCLA conducted a study to identify the predictors of PTSD among African American and Latino young men. They call it the LADS screener, LADS, Latinos and African Americans life adversities. And there were 5 domains. One was experience. They all experienced discrimination. Number 2, they had a history of sexual abuse. Number 3, they had a history of violence. Number 4, they had a history of violence in the individual's community. But number 5 was a chronic fear of being killed or seriously injured. So there was a period, most recently 2000s and in the 90s, where black men were dying. They didn't think that they would live past 25 years old. Mm-hmm. Past 25 years old. And so that's why these studies were conducted, because they couldn't see themselves living to 30. If you got to 30, you were old. And so this notion of suicide at 7 to 11, and then community death in the 20s to just shooting everybody up, it was a real predictor. And one of the things that I thought about when you talked about bringing guns to our community, not only did they bring guns to our community, they encouraged us to use them. Not only did they drop drugs in our community, we were encouraged to use them. It was communal, it was societal. It was like, ooh, let's get this. Ooh. And so if you're conditioned in that way, it doesn't take much for you to not see how dangerous that is. You don't see, you think of it, it's like, to have experience of discrimination is like, oh, white people don't like black people don't like white people. They don't look at how that impacts your core, your mindset, your way of being. To walk down the street, I had a client one time, and he came into my class, and he had his pants down below his butt. I said, you cannot come in here with your pants down below your butt like that. Nobody wants to see all that. And so I was telling my son about that, and he says, well, Mom, what different? Now, this is a man who has a doctorate degree, right? Smart, family man, brilliant. I love him. And he said, Mom, what difference does it make? And who are you to control where he chooses to have his pants on his hips? I would want you to be more concerned about his mind and how he thinks about himself in that way. So we had this great discourse. I mean, he always trying to throw me a zinger, and that was a good one. So trying to control where somebody has their pants on their body, I don't want to see that. And that's from my generation. We don't walk around. Remember, my dad was dressed to the nines every day, sharp, clean. That's what I like to see. But that wearing your clothes like that in that generation, I know, is a need for attention. It's a need to be seen. People have 5 things that they need. They need to feel safe. They need to feel secure. They need to feel stable. And they need to feel loved. And they need to be seen. And so we'll do anything that we can to go within. And that's just innate. It's unconscious. You're not saying, oh, I need to be seen. You know, it's an unconscious way of being. So in that particular study, that fear of being killed or seriously injured, a chronic fear, not just a regular fear or a little fear, a chronic fear, which is a highly sustained fear for over a long period of time when it becomes chronic. Chronic, not the drug chronic, but a chronic, like chronic stress. You have stress, you have anxiety, and then you have chronic stress over a prolonged period of time is when that comes up. So yeah. And then I wanted to give one book recommendation when we come to this. When you were talking about Reconstruction and the migration, a woman, Isabel Wilkerson, she wrote that book, The Warmth of Other Suns, which is a thick book, but it's also on Audible. And she talks about that migration and the need for us that once Reconstruction came and then people started migrating to the north, and we got sick and tired of being sick and tired with the sharecropping. And then by the time it came around for you to get paid, you have borrowed all the money against that. And some people, and these are doctors and lawyers and professional people that were migrating with their families to the south. And then white people were like, well, what's going to happen to me? What am I going to do about this? So they stopped selling train tickets. You were in a town, you had to go 2 or 3 towns over. So we would go to the sharecropper man and say, hey, I can't do this anymore. I want to go. He said, well, you can't leave. Well, what you mean I can't leave? I'm not enslaved anymore. What are you talking about? He said, you can't leave. What am I going to do? Well, man, that ain't my problem. So then they go try to buy a train ticket, and the people at the train ticket, the people who got the power, won't sell them the tickets. That's how come I think Black people keep their mouth shut, because if you tell people your business, then they'll figure out a way to use it against you. So then they didn't tell people when they were leaving. They would go 2 or 3 towns over, get their ticket, and get on up out of there. And I think that's that essence of us not being, not telling people what we're doing, because it's not safe. I don't feel safe. I don't always want to be seen, but I don't feel safe and secure in your domain because you don't have my best interest at heart.
Now, this ties into something else. You've talked about, how trauma affects us in different ways, but there's always the discussion that gets tagged to that of resilience, that our people also have resilience, and that resilience has really carried us through. The ability to carry, the ability, no matter how far we sink down, to come back up. What do both of you attribute to this resilience? What are some of the things that contribute to us being able to stand tall and even with scars, to hold on to the core of our being? What are some of the things you think contribute to that?
So for me, first and foremost is that unwavering thought, expression, knowing that I am loved, period. My mother and my father loved me. My mother and my father, my grandmother, my grandfather, my great-grandmother, as far as I go back in my family, I looked in the eyes of elders who genuinely loved me, even when they, people were talking about me. People weren't so kind to me. I heard people say, let that girl alone. Leave her alone. Hush. Stop talk about your own self. So the unconditional love that I experienced from the elders, primarily my parents, always at some point kicked in and reminded me that I was loved, and love could help me with whatever I went through. So I knew I was loved. Two, every one of them had some kind of a spiritual platform. Now we know the Black church is our cornerstone, right? Everything that created that we were able to create in terms of humanity, we were secured by a Black church somewhere. The promotion within the Black church, that additional human condition for me to be one with God, for me to know that there was a power greater than my own that loved and cared for me, that would make intercession for me, that would give me a way out when I was in trouble, was critical when all the lights were out and I didn't know which way to turn. And then me having those two elements, me having those so that I could give those to my children coming behind me. I knew, when I saw the look in my children's eyes, I knew I had to get help. I would have killed myself based on the pain and guilt I felt from what I was seeing in my children's eyes when I was at my lowest point. So my desire and my assuming the responsibility that I was responsible for making sure that my children had what I was given in terms of love, protection, and care, allowed me to make the commitment to do. If I wasn't as good as my mama, I felt guilt and all of that stuff. However, what I did have, I knew that I had a responsibility to give to my children and then to my grandchildren as much of it as I could, even though my mama was never on drugs. She said one time, I wouldn't even know what drugs was if they slapped me in the face. And she was right. When I was busy talking about my recovery, she was like, oh, she's on this anti-drug campaign now. She all over the world talking about, drugs. She didn't see me as getting ready to die and I was in recovery and I was doing that to save my life. She saw me as, just helping people on drugs and traveling the world talking about, people getting off of drugs. So, but having those kind of secure thought processes and those kind of secure places to be in, to tap into, to turn back to, even when I was far away from it, are the most critical things that I give credit to for why I'm sitting here and why I have been able to do those things, even when my mama was crying, like, oh no, don't leave that good job and go to school. Well, my heart said, it don't matter what your mama say, you got to do this. Well, I know that that's why I'm sitting here now, something she didn't know. But the reason I was able to was because, one, I always knew I was loved. Two, I knew there was a power greater than my own, that if I sought it out, if I searched it, if I seeked it, if I could seek it, I would have experiences that I had seen people before me have, and that I could trust that power, because white folks can't kill it off, right? It's invisible. They can burn down my house, but they can't separate me from my belief that there is a power greater than mine at work for me, strengthening me and encouraging me and protecting me in a way for me to move forward in designs that as a human are tailor-made just for me. That power is so magnificent, so indescribable, that it has plans tailor-made for every human being on the planet. My role in keeping myself connected to it and not allowing the struggles and challenges of this life to confuse me about that is my responsibility.
Brianna, what do you have to say on this?
So,
what are some of the keys to our resilience?
Resilience, yes. So I, like Gloria, had a mother that loves and everything she said. However, I'm a therapist today because there are a lot of people that didn't have what we have with our mothers. And the foster care system is definitely evidence of that. You know, I have clients who had children at 15 years old and were given to unwed home for mothers, and then were put into the foster care system and stayed there for the whole entire time and suffered suffered greatly. And then another evidence of that is adverse childhood experiences. But the other side of the adverse childhood experience is the resilience study. So ACEs lets you know where you are. The resilience study, and you can look this up on ACES Too High, ACESTOOHIGH.com. And then you'll see the questions about resilience. And the definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, or the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape. So when I think about this spring backiosity, a word I make up, when you come from trauma. So white people say, in order to have resilience, you must have gone through trauma. So I say, well, that's true. Because if you were enslaved, then that is traumatic. So that's not talking about a modern day trauma. It's talking about a generational and intergenerational trauma that our people have survived. And in order to have survived that or to spring back from that, we have that resilience that's necessary. Now, sometimes we don't recognize our resilience. And I remember my mother say, when I was first going into treatment, she said, oh, you just need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I was like, well, I'm going to go try to do that. She said, well, just, pull yourself up, go back to work and get it together. Just make it happen. Right. And so she could say that because she came from a place where my mother migrated from the South to California, Louisiana, Natchitoches, Louisiana to California. They got a job in a H.J. Hayes Canning Company. The glue boiler exploded and injured my mother's arm. She had this burn on her arm. Do you know how much that people gave her? $100. Do you know how she moved through the trauma of that? With no help. That was her example of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps and going back out and getting back to work. So when you think about Roses in Concrete, there are lots of organizations, but one young man particularly struck me. His name is Charles Hunt. He has a YouTube and a TED Talk. And he has the same addiction story as we have, being homeless at 7 years old, meaning sleeping on his grandmother's floor because his daddy died in prison and his mother was an addict. And he said, I know my parents love me and they did the best that they could. He started a business to help young men to be able to move through trauma and to become resilient. And you know what he called it? The Audacity Firm. You know why he named it that? Because his grandmother said, boy, you got the audacity to come up in here that time of night. He didn't even know what that meant, right? But he soon got it. So he named his business the Audacity Firm. And he started out with nothing. And now his business is over 6 figures. That's resilience. That's called positive growth syndrome, where you take a difficult trauma and you turn it around so that you're able to see the benefits and growth and help for somebody else. I became a therapist and a recovery counselor because my little brother at 19 years old had schizophrenia. He developed schizophrenia. I thought that his mother-in-law sprinkled some foo-foo voodoo on him and made him go crazy. I didn't know nothing about schizophrenia. I took him to Synanon, as a matter of fact. And those people were screaming at him and calling him all these names and all that. I said, my mama gonna pray my brother up out of this. He suffered with this until he died at 58 years old. And I was embarrassed because he would blow like that all the time and talk to himself. So I'm just don't do that. Don't do that. And the only thing that shut that up for him or quieted those voices was alcohol. But I didn't know. And then when I go to school and I learned the impact of schizophrenia. It's not a schizophrenic, it's a person who has schizophrenic. We have to keep the humanity in front of all of these disorders because there are human beings underneath that. And so what we don't know is that we suffer from this internalized oppression, and then we get these mental disorders. And some of them are more visible, And some of them are invisible, some of them are conscious, a lot of them are unconscious, but we continue to press on because of the resilience that we have, because we want to be better and we want to do better and we want to see our people to be helped. So resilience, yeah. But check out that Charles Hunt. It's really, he got a few of them, but it's 17 minutes. TED Talks now, but 17 minutes. And it's amazing.
Now, what both of you have described and what you described, Gloria, as love and spirituality, and Brianna, how you've got to address the conditions of people who didn't get it dispensed to them in the normal way through the family and in other ways, and your way is to help them.
Mm-hmm.
What you're describing here is the way in which our culture operates, because that's basically the way our culture operates.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Because here we have, let me give you a little story on slavery, okay? Black people hated themselves. That's the narrative. You know, we had drilled in us so many terrible things, we ended up hating ourselves. You know, yeah, we did come out with some color complexes and some sense of less than. I mean, 249 years is going to do something to you. You know what I mean? But we also came out with people with extraordinarily high levels of pride. But here's the key point. The people and the institutions that we created, which makes up this culture, the main thing they did was dispense love. That's the key point. Separated from family, grandmother, grandfather, sister, brother, and you're thrown into some world that you didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
It was some old lady or some old man or just somebody there that took you in almost always.
Mm-hmm.
And when, you were singing your spirituals in the ring shout, and don't think that these people were Christians. Most of them were not. The ring shout is a counterclockwise dance done in Africa to harmonize heaven with earth, because they say God loves music. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is, you have slave narratives where slaves would say this: I didn't have fodder or mudder, but I got some love, and that was enough.
Mm-hmm.
You hear me?
Yeah.
And so at the end of slavery, maybe 2 nickels to rub together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we had all kinds of orphans and everything else. And when the Freedmen's Bureau is set up, one of the things they're supposed to do is take care of orphans. But there were none, because we took care of all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You hear me?
That's right.
And to this day, our rate of putting old people in old folks' homes is lower than anybody else's. It's higher because of the drug thing and the whole pressure it's put on our extended family networks and
Right.
grandmothers and all the rest. They've been overtaxed. But the fact is, it's a part of our nature to care, to be kind. That is a part of our nature, and it's built into the culture. And the same thing with God. And by the way, I pointed this out before. African people didn't need no religion to tell us to be good. We knew that's a part of being a human being.
Yes.
We didn't need no commandment to say thou shalt not kill. We know you ain't supposed to, unless it's in self-defense. You know what I mean? Or something that's justified. And so that's because that's built into us. That's not true of every culture.
Mm-hmm.
As I pointed out before, Euro-American or Aryan culture is teleological. That means utility-based. What is good is what benefits the person who's wielding power. So when they say good from their deep culture, because some of them mean good, but others, they mean they got the power to get what they want.
Mm-hmm.
And so slavery was good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
War is good. It's got nothing to do with kind, right, gentle, but that's built into us. So part of the resilience is inside of you. And if these drugs take over for a period of time, you've got other things to counter it. And how many people that have been down on the ground you see turn around? How many? And some of those end up being our greatest people, because they've experienced this, they've learned this, and they become more kind, more gentle, more caring. Now, just 2 more things and we'll wrap this up. One is, what is it that you think, from your experience, has led people who are addicted, whatever the form of addiction is, to make a decision to get off of it? And what kind of changes occur in their lives when that happens? What is it that drives some people, a lot of people, to get off of whatever the drug is?
Pain, 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 pain. No longer can I stand the pain, the emotional pain, the mental pain, the spiritual pain. When I look in the mirror, I don't like what I see. I can't feel who I was before. I have lost my drive and determination to do well. I have become ashamed of myself, and I feel that on a visceral level. I remember that my son, when I finally made the decision to go into long-term treatment, and my son was a small little guy, and he was suffering. I remember one time I used to always say I would leave him by himself and I would go out and go get loaded and come back. And so there were several things that came along, but one of the ones that still breaks my heart today is I left him and I came back. And in a baby's eye, he was 3 years old, and a baby's eyes still hurts today. And he's 46. Jeez. That's why trauma still lives in the body. And his eyes were all swollen up. And I said, "What's the matter? What's the matter?" He said, I stepped on an earring and all I wanted was my mother and you weren't here. And I couldn't say nothing because lying wouldn't have been the first thing. Oh, I had to go take care of something. I just was quiet. And all I could do was just hold him. That was the first thing that made me realize this has got to stop. You are no longer in control. And then that statement that my mother made, you can't stop. You could lie to a lot of people, but stop lying to yourself. When you start to lie to yourself, you're in real significant trouble. And then finally, my rent was something like $500. And I didn't have the money to pay my rent. And I'm working a full-time job, making $50,000, $60,000 a year. And I didn't have the money to take care of that. And then finally, the straw that broke the camel's back is I became a thief. I stole, that was another one. I stole from work. I traveled on my job. We put together conferences. And so they would give me money to secure all of the support services. And I said, well, hell, I don't know why they don't know I'm a dolphin. So I would smoke that money up the night before. And then I had to go to these major hotels and, I'm supposed to be tipping people on behalf of this organization and handling all. And I didn't have it. And I was so ashamed. And, it was just really, really, really got to be too much. And then the last thing is I started to have sex with the dope man. That was one of my yets. I used to say, well, I never did that. And we call that yets. You're eligible to. And I started to have sex with the dope man and stealing his drugs while he was asleep. I mean, this is the lowest in my mind. That was the lowest of the low of the rung that I could get. So pain, being sick and tired of being sick and tired, stealing, lying, and not being able to look myself in the mirror and not being available for my son when he became hurt. And they were sequential. And I was just going down, 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 down. And the last thing I remember, I had got clean and then I went back out, but I didn't tell anybody for a whole year. And so I was going to meetings, acting as if, and, still getting loaded. And so this woman says to me, I said, hurry up, just go get the drugs. She said, you know what? You're a worse drug addict than me. You going to the meetings and standing up there and talking to people and lying in their face, and you just still a dope fiend just like me. So don't try to act like you all that. I said, girl, just go get the dope and shut up. Right? But levels of pain and degradation got me to a place where I found a place with people with levels of degradation that was way, way worse than mine. And we could connect we could connect our mind, body, and spirit and help each other walk through that, and not, and like Gloria said, you don't have to be ashamed. If we start comparing, girl, that ain't nothing. You ought to hear what I did, So just that love and support of people that, help me to not feel that shame or that sense of shame. That is obviously still in there, because I got teary when I thought about my baby stepping on that earring, and he's long forgiven me, but I guess there's some more work on me forgiving myself. So I'm going to stop there.
Gloria, what do you have to say about what are the things that lead people to get off? And by the way, Brianna, as usual, your honesty is more than appreciated, because a lot of people can relate to that because they're going through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for me, it was similar. For me, I had heard a lot of negative things about myself that weren't true. It was just how my community responded to me. You ain't nothing. If you didn't have them green eyes, you wouldn't be shit. Blah, blah, blah. Right. And that created the kind of pain and anguish in me that I didn't even know I had. So when the medication of drugs and alcohol started to work, then I started to hear all that negativity, and now it was true. I did feel like I wasn't nothing. I did feel like, I didn't deserve any better. I did feel like I was never going to be anything. And so my love for my children was that big motivation. And then my mother looking at me, and at one point she just grabbed me and she shook me and she said, you the happiest child I got. I don't know what's wrong with you, but please, you gotta stop. You gotta get yourself together. You the happiest child I got. And at that time, I felt that, and I heard my mother, because my sister had been on drugs and my mother had to raise her children. And my brother grew up with really bad asthma, where his life was kind of threatened a few times because of his asthma as a baby and when he was young. And so she always viewed him as sickly, where she viewed me as happy. She viewed me as like her, as her happiness. And that if there was something really wrong with me, then she was going to sink, because my sister had clear, obvious problems and my brother had medical problems. So I had to be her golden child, if you will. Now, because of the emotional dynamics, we all grew up thinking my brother was like her favorite. But I later learned that it really was there was not a favorite. There were different things that we were as people, and she understood our differences. But knowing that my mother relied on me for that part of her, like I couldn't live with knowing that she was that worried about me and she was that frightened for me. And I knew she couldn't help me. She couldn't fix what was going on with me. So, that, and my children, like I said, I was deadly suicidal. The only thing only reason I didn't commit suicide was because one of my children were likely to be the first one to find me, and I couldn't do that to them too. I went from, I got clean when my kids were in Catholic school, right? So I couldn't be an addict. My kids go to Catholic school. That's crazy, right? But I was class mother for 3 children in the same school. And yet I had turned into a woman that my children were looking at, and I could see in their eyes, they were thinking, man, if you see my mama, could you please tell her to come home? Because who I had become was somebody they didn't even know. So that level of pain and anguish I wouldn't have continued to live. And so when I landed in 12-step programs and I saw that what I had in common was not that my kids was in Catholic school, was not that I still had a job and a place to live. What I had in common was the level of pain and sorrow that I was fighting against. And what I had in common was a desire to not let drugs and alcohol kill me and to not cause more havoc and horror in my family.
Yeah, these are very honest things. That pain, Brianna is saying pain and degradation. Those things really are the things that drove you to move to get off of this. And you, Gloria, you're talking about family and what your family saw in you, and you not wanting to disappoint your family,
Mm-hmm.
and that also comes back to love. The very thing you were talking about before, because what was motivating your mother is love of you,
Mm-hmm.
and an appreciation of you, the qualities that you have as a human being, among all her children, the special qualities you have. Someone who had an optimistic view of life. I mean, that's real important, So I want to close this with overall solution, and I want to put forward one, and then get your response, and you deal with yours, and we'll wrap this up. Given what you said, I could just limit it to that. I would say, but even on a broader scale, but I would say that the overall solution for addiction and for a lot of the other things that trouble us, low self-esteem, which, as I recall, when you did your paper on causes of addiction, you were looking at males, but would apply to females as well. Your overall conclusion was the primary thing that drives Black men to addiction, and would apply to Black women as well, is low self-esteem. Because if you look at all these indicators that you've been giving, both of you, in this analysis, it's got to do with, covering up deep feelings, making you feel like things are good when they aren't. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has got to do with also not, the childhood trauma and stuff and all of the things that really mess you up, which is real, but it's got to do also with your estimation of yourself. One of you talking about being more concerned about what other people thought about you than what you think about yourself. You know what I mean? Which is a big fat mistake that a lot of people, not just Black people, make. Living someone else's life for them rather than for yourself. You know what I mean? So I would say that there's an overall overarching thing that provides the overarching solution to all of this. In fact, I think one of the reasons why 12-step works is for Blacks, it's not only got a system, but God's up in it. God's real key in this thing.
That's right.
And with Black folks, God's in everything.
Yep.
This Aubrey verdict that you saw, Black people, the parents and everybody saying, thank you, God. Now, I think God's up in stuff, but God don't want credit for stuff God didn't do. God did not bring about that verdict, because if God did, then what are you going to say about Rittenhouse? You know what I mean? Was God behind that? No, God ain't behind slavery. It was a good ship, Jesus, but that wasn't Jesus, and it certainly wasn't God, that did that, So we're often attributing God to stuff that God don't even want an attribute to, when in fact it's what we did, or it's what somebody else did, or it just happened. But the fact of the matter is that God is also up in us, and God is central. Love is up in us. Love is central. And if we didn't get any, and some of these crack babies didn't get any, and that's one of the real big problems we got right now. For the first time, we have some kids that didn't get any love. Now, this across the board, it's not everybody, but it's a significant group. And if they got thrown into this foster care thing and the dice were thrown and it didn't come up a winning number, and you end up with some abusive foster care parents, you know what I mean? Right. So you don't know which way that one's going. So, we've been put in that kind of position. So I would say that given especially this era we're in, but it's the same with enslavement, that the overall solution to all of this, and we haven't been talking about those that don't use drugs, those families that are functional. You have, because you've been talking about you had good families, but there are other forces that intervene into that. So I would suggest, and I just want to get your response to this, the overall answer in terms of healing, whether it is drug addiction, alcoholic addiction, food disorders. Some places in the world, people eat a lot, not out of frustration and not out of oppression. You know what I mean? But here, clearly it's tied to that. And then the stuff we're getting, empty calories and stuff, McDonald's diets and stuff, that is really killing us. So I would say the overall solution is that love, which is a key thing for the person, that family, which is whatever level your family is at, some part of your family or your immediate family that is dispensing that, friends or extended family, people that you picked up and adopted, that's all an expression of culture. It's an expression of your culture.
Yeah.
So within the solutions, it's the culture more than anything. And love is at the top of it, and self-love, which is something that, we have to nurture and develop, and none of us have it fully, and we have to work on it. But if we have basic self-love, that's the key to everything else. And so this thing of 6-fold stages of mental freedom, I'm not going into it, but Malcolm X, that was what healed him. And ultimately, it's the love thing. And if you already have that, you may not need it as much, but you're going to have unevenness in your own development, not just because you were using drugs or something. It may be something else that has got you down. So what do y'all think of that?
So I have a few solutions. First, I want to give the definition of clean pain and dirty pain, because I do see that as a solution. So clean pain is by this notion with, it wasn't invented by Resmaa Mensah, who wrote My Grandmother's Hand, but it's an element, a key part of his book. So clean pain is pain that mends and you can build your capacity for growth. You experience clean pain when you know exactly what you need to say or do, when you really, really, really don't want to do it, and you do it anyway. It's also the pain you experience when you have no idea what to do, like when you're scared or when you're worried about what might happen. You step forward into the unknown with honesty and vulnerability. Examples are like grief and sorrow and sadness and natural disasters and terrorism and on like that. Dirty pain is the pain of avoidance and blame. Responses from the most wounded parts that become cruel or violent. You're not taking responsibility for your own behavior. You're blaming or projecting yourself for a painful experience that was out of your or their control. The word should, when you hear the word should, that's a definite example of dirty pain. Blaming a victim for what they're wearing or what they're doing or how they're being, or blaming even an entire group also. So one of the solutions that I say is, number one, have a clear inventory of your self-need. Your physical conditions. One of the sisters on here is talking about supplements, vitamin supplements. That's so important. Your physical condition. How do you feel in your body? How do you accept yourself? What gives you pleasure? Not what gives other people's pleasure, but what gives you pleasure? How do you support yourself? What do you do to support yourself? Taking responsibility for your own support. Slow down. We used to have a saying in my little cabinet back. We used to say we had stuff on a platter And then we had so much stuff we had to put it on a platter. And then we had to put it on a tabletop. And then the other day, somebody said, yep, it's just so much stuff. It's just all over the floor. And that doesn't allow us to slow down because we take on so many issues of our own making and of other folks' making. Learn to say no. No is a complete sentence. Participate in your community. This is a way to participate in your community. I'm just loving these comments here. Everybody's engaged. Be curious and explore your own mind, body, and yourself. What brings you joy? What makes you feel satisfied? Not something that you could eat or do, but situations that cause you to feel joy and that love that Gloria and Dr. Baba was talking about. What are your priorities? Make a list of your priorities. Writing things down takes it from up here to in here to out here. And so when you write them down, that's a whole process. And you could see that. And you could feel that experience. What are you grateful for? Having gratitude is a solution to addiction woes. Addiction woes. Even with 35 years, I still have addiction woes that has shifted from drugs and alcohol to other types of behavior. Giving attention to yourself, making good choices, and most of all, being kind. In this pandemic, we are not learning how to be kind. We have stopped learning how to be kind to one another. You walk around, you have this mask. Now we're starting to learn a little bit more on when the eyes are smiling or not smiling. But this is not a normal way to be. We are human beings, and we need to be touched more than we need to eat food. It's just the way that it is. Our vagus nerve requires that, touching one another. And now we just like, when I first went out, I saw everybody had the cooties. And I had my mask on to protect me, and they had their mask on to protect them from my cooties as well. And then the last thing that I want to say till Gloria get back, there are 6 things to remember. These are important. You might want to write them down. Number 1, separate tasks that need immediate attention from those that do not. If there's something on your list that you can't get to today, oh, well, ain't no thing but a chicken wing. Number 2, if you need help, ask for help. Asking for help is a sign of strength. It's not a sign of weakness. Number 3, carefully choose what you will cancel. In a panic, you may cancel your online subscriptions. I have 7 subscriptions to different television shows, plus I have cable. I don't need all that. So I am going to make a commitment to get some of that because those $19 add up, and I could take that money and put that somewhere else. So I'm going to do what I say. Join me in that. Number 4, don't try to be a people pleaser. Communicating with others can be a challenge now. So saying no isn't about being self-centered. You may find yourself with a situation where you just want to listen to somebody else. What I found that if I ask people what they need, they will most often say, I just need somebody to listen to me. I was like, I'm 70 years old. You don't want my advice? If I could just have somebody listen to me, that would be so good. Like, Baba, you are an excellent listener. I love hearing you, but I also know that you're a good listener. Number 5, don't speak negatively about yourself. What you think about, you bring about. So if you say I'm always late, or I can't get that done, or I ain't got no money, guess what? You will not have those things. You just say I'm time challenged, and make it your responsibility to show up when you say you're going to show up. If you say I'm going to be there at 10 o'clock, then if you know you're going to have trouble, leave at 8:30, right? Care about other people's time and ways of being the way you may not care about your own. So be your word. Don't speak negatively about yourself. And then again, write things down. Our memories, we're bombarded in a pandemic, so we're not remembering things that we used to do or need to do. You ever walk into a room and think that you're going in there to get something, and when you get to the room, you can't remember what it was that you came for? So here's a little hint. Just say, I'm not going to chase that thought around the room. Guess what? It comes right back. That's my wisdom. I waited for you, Gloria.
Thank you. I'm sorry. What was the question again?
The question is overall solutions to addiction. We're talking about why people get off alcohol, off drugs. But here, I threw down the thing that I think that the overall category for these solutions have to deal with those things that help us develop self-love,
Mm-hmm.
self-knowledge, self-respect, and that is within the context of our culture, both African and African American. So I was asking, what do you think? And Brianna has given a whole series of things that have to do with positive ways for a person to see and be themselves. So what's your view on that?
So I agree with, I could hear from where I was. For me, the most important thing that I did, that I encourage people to do, is I admitted that I had behaviors that were clearly a direct result of my self-hate.
Mm-hmm.
As a Black woman, when I first started to uncover my experiences with, when I first started to uncover how I treated myself and the kinds of things I tolerated in my life, I had no choice but to honor that there was a lot of self-hate at work, even without drugs and alcohol, before drugs and alcohol and after drugs and alcohol. I quickly learned that you say something about self-hate, most Black women, most Black men are going to say, I don't hate myself, but I ain't got nothing to do with hate for me. And I had to stay, like the old folks used to say, I had to stay firmly planted in that position because, one, it was clear that my behavior, getting involved with young men, period, who already were involved with other women, setting myself for the kind of pain and anguish that brought into my life, thinking that, oh, well, but he really loves me, and staying in there trying to go the distance to end up in what I termed as, somebody who was going to love me, was really, really false. It was inappropriate. And it was a direct result of how little I saw in myself. I didn't deserve to have a man to myself. I didn't deserve to be loved totally and completely and honored and respected by a man, because I didn't have that for myself. And so staying, even when people I knew were trying to talk me out of, well, you can't, don't you think it's this? Don't you think it's that? I had to stay firmly planted in the reality that my self-hate was running my life. It was paramount. And that gave me the courage to do something about it. And so for me, I had to start telling myself the truth. I was able to tell others the truth, but I was still able to lie to myself. So I had to start telling myself the truth. I had to honor when I'm making up an excuse for being in a situation with somebody, friend, family, or whatever, that I'm being dishonored in some kind of way, whether it's jokes about me that I laugh and join into, whether it's tones of conversation that are offensive, that I have to say, that I don't really like the way you're talking to me. Even if I'm fearful if that person is going to leave me and go away, I have to do those things. Taking care, admitting that I didn't know how to take care of myself, looking around and seeing that I could take care of the men in my life. I could take care of my children. I could even take care of grandchildren. But how I was at the bottom of my totem pole when it came to taking care of myself, I had to balance that out. I had to accept that. The big one for me was have to honor that the same rules and regulations and guidelines that my mother and grandmother had to live by, no longer could I live by those. Tolerating poor behavior from men, saying things like, well, hell, he paid the bills, or, I have to have some help from him. I had to honor that I woke up one day in a world that, while they had groomed me for the world that they grew up in and they evolved in, I was one day in a world, I had to tell my daughters, if you sleep with somebody unprotected, you're going to die of AIDS. Nobody could tell me that when I was coming up, because that wasn't true. I had to tell my daughters things like, if he's already involved with another woman, it's not because he don't love her no more and he's going to leave her and get with you and y'all going to live happily after. It's because he likes a lot of women and a lot of women like him. And you're going to have to make a decision on whether or not you want to be a woman in that kind of a stable, or you're going to hold out until you meet somebody who really is completely free and single that you have some interest with. Nobody had those kind of conversations with me. Nobody was capable and nobody knew how. And so I had to have conversations like, I look back in my life and I see that I put men in first class and I was in coach. I had to have those kind of conversations and I had to not lie about them. And I had to tell my daughters and my nieces and my nephews that had all those things going on. I had to tell them the truth about how being in those positions affected me, how it made me feel, and what I did to free myself from lying to myself and making up excuses for participating in ways in my own life that did not serve me, that did not help me. I had to honor the prices that were paid by people like you who educated me, who taught me that I really was more than I could see. And I have to keep pushing myself to know and believe and accept that I am more than I see. I am more than I believe. And none of it's going to be true unless I stand in it. I can't marry a man who's going to make me feel like a queen and I'm just going to fast forward and collect my $200 and go. I'm not going to. My children can't give it to me. My grandchildren can't give it to me. I have to be honest about who I am and what I am. And then I have to walk my talk. I have to back it up. I cannot make excuses for belittling myself or having me belittled by someone else and say things like, oh, it ain't that big a deal. It ain't. I'm in the war for me. And I have to align myself with people, places, and things that are going to support and be useful, because there are times that I get frightened and I get frozen. And I shared that I started the book, man. I started the book and I ain't looked at it in 3, 4, 5 months. Well, it ain't going to get finished like that. And I've got to believe in myself enough to move through. And I have to be willing to do that work. And that's whatever that means. One day it might mean going to bed at 8 o'clock. One day it might mean, just eating salad for the day. And one day it might mean I feel low and I need to get in the bed and pull the covers over my head and stay there for 24 hours. I have to give myself permission. And now I'm older, right? I'm retired now. So, I get to do a whole lot of stuff that I didn't know I could do. But at the same time, I need to still have those priorities. Like I want to write the book. So I have to believe in myself to write the book. And I have to talk to people who are going to support me. I don't want nobody calling me every 3 days saying, well, how's the book going? What's going on with the book? Because I don't want to hear all that. But I do have to follow through and be who I say I am. Not who people think I am, but who I believe I am.
Beautiful. What's common in all of this, and I think that this is key, not just for someone who's come off alcohol or drug, because there are all kinds of addictions, as Brianna has said, and I call one of our diseases of addiction is whiteitis. Yeah.
What does that mean?
What that means is identifications of beings that are alien to us, in this case, white folks. And a lot of this low self-esteem has been drilled into us. And so I think that Gloria's point about a marker is, are you placing yourself first? And it's not selfish what she's talking about. because we're often taught that loving self is selfish. No, it's not. It's the very basis for every other kind of love. And so, what you all are saying also is love of self is just like the love that God has of us. It's unconditional. So you take your whole self. You know, I know in my life, I've had my shortcomings. I have them, and I embrace them. I mean, I was one brainwashed Negro at one point, headed off to probably fight the white boys' war. I don't think so though, because I had enough programming coming from my mother, which was moral, and my father that was political, that wouldn't fight for the white man. I woke up, I knew at a certain point I wouldn't. But the key point is that in my own development, I own this life. And so there are things in this life that there was my brainwashed stage. I was a Boy Scout, Life Scout. I was a lieutenant colonel in the ROTC, best cadet. I was a Marine in the reserves. Now, none of this don't do black people any good. You know what I mean? Even though the Boy Scouts have their positive side, I don't know if you know it, but this guy who founded the Boy Scouts was a major military leader that was a part of the war against the Asante in the last war, you know, which was vicious. And so even though they have these nice values, they were teaching you, the Boy Scouts was preparing you for war, for patriotism. We'd always pledge allegiance to the flag. And then they had all these trustworthy, loyal, all this kind of stuff. So for me, I don't say, well, yeah, I was this brainwashed, blah, blah. No, that was a part of my development. And I got some positives out of it too. You know what I mean? I got some positive. Boy Scouts, I got to learn how to shoot. You know what I mean? That was real positive.
I love that. You know what I mean? No, I mean?
I'm sorry. I want to interrupt for a second because I do have to leave. And I want to thank all the people who came that I invited. I know people have been texting me, and I appreciate you guys for coming and supporting the program. And Dr. Tashaka, we ain't going nowhere. So, thank you. I want to thank Brianna for always, I call it my first string. And I'm, I took that from Fillmore Slim, and y'all do some research about him, but he called all his dedicated, committed ladies first string. And I think everybody needs a cabinet or a first string or some group that is your go-to that will, one, love you unconditionally, two, will tell you the truth about you, and three, who trusts you. Trust is the biggest thing that I didn't know I didn't have. I had no idea what trust was. So I just lied. When I got my feelings hurt, I just left. I didn't have to learn how to trust because I could leave. I had my mama. And if you wasn't going to treat me right, it didn't matter. Hell, my mama was going to treat me right. I was going to see her no matter what you did, right? That's why I got into all those dysfunctional relationships. My mama was the best date I ever had. So at one point, I didn't worry about them. But Brianna, you have always been on my first string in a way that I cannot describe. I'm not going to try, but I just want you to know that my heart is a better heart because I got a best friend like you. It is a better heart.
Right.
We're such good friends. I changed her name. I changed her name to Gloria Ann.
My middle name is Ann. We're going to leave it like that. And Dr. Tashaka, when I think about you and when I think about others who poured into me, I always cry. Tears of joy and gratitude. I had no idea I was a smart little girl. I had no idea I was a smart woman. And I had no idea that I could arrive at a world-renowned university and make people proud. I had no idea. And not only did that happen, but it still happens. It happens today and it happens every day. And I just want you to know from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for how you refined me and how you made clear that I had better go and show this world what the rest of us would not see because they were not going to make it to a university. But what I did at San Francisco State, I was responsible for making sure that everybody who looked like me benefit from. And I still hear our exchanges on the campus and off. And I just want you to know that I love you. I appreciate you. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful that you love you. That you love you so much that you can't help but love us and help us and teach us like nobody else can. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
And guess what? I got one of the best teachings of my life today. See, students are teachers and teachers are students. And
Yes.
today I learned a lot, but I'm not surprised because you're ascension, both of you. You know what I mean? And what you're doing is healing work for our people. And this is absolutely necessary. Loving ladies.
Yeah.
That's
I
why,
have to leave.
that's why I think of all God's creations, woman, and for us, the Black woman. You know what I mean? And the conscious Black woman. Well, that's a sight, a lovely sight. And this has just been pure pleasure. You know what I mean?
Thank you. I have to leave, but I'll talk to you both real soon. And thank you to the public listening, everybody learning here today. We do have work to do, but guess what? We are equipped. We are equipped.
Right.
Yeah.
Bye, Gloria Jean.
And for all the new people that watch, subscribe, hit the subscriber button. I just wanted to say finally, and we go to the questions and then wrap this up. Unconditional love is the key. Accepting yourself the way you are. And that's also tied to how you see your people. I've never seen a Black person who loved themselves, had a positive view of themselves and a negative view of their people. You know, you can't have a positive view of yourself unless you have a positive view of your people. And that does not mean romantic, and that does not mean denying shortcomings and weaknesses that we all have. But basically, that's key. And that is tied to a love of your roots, of your history, of your culture, both African and African American. These things, it's all love. So this has been wonderful. Any final thing you want to say, Brianna?
No, I've said a lot. I've been watching the comments. Everybody's comments are so inspiring. I just really appreciate when people can sit for 2 hours, 2.5 hours now, and hear and be present and just take it in and have a discourse. I love school, and I love that discourse. And I wrote that down. You have to have a positive view of people to have a positive view of yourself, of your people. I love that.
Right on. Okay, let's see. We got a few comments here. JB, I hung around 100 people. Trust me, I wasn't protesting white supremacy. They know I will come.
Bless his heart.
Against, I will tell my friend you cannot have her because she's a sweet woman, blah, blah. Okay. And this is a thank you. Let's see if there's any comments or questions.
Go up to the top. There are a lot of some questions at the top.
Yeah. That's my wife there, Pamela Hurley.
Oh,
Mindset
hey, Miss Wifey.
that make you want to do that in the first place. Yeah. Terranata, sad, my love for African Black people is so strong and will never betray our fight. He was responding at the point where self-hate was being discussed. But that's real, you know, and the examples of how it manifests. Because sometimes we can have it and not see it. JB, I'm 32. I used to talk to a woman that was 59. Then I stopped.
Skip.
Yeah, let's keep going here. Terranetta, that is our school, Eurocentric schooling can't help me. I'm trying to get off the heroin, but the pain is too much. Pain for 12 years, 6 years, and 4 years. I just keep falling off. You got any comment on that?
Well, the key that you keep getting back up is the key there. You keep getting back up and you keep trying. You keep getting back up and you keep trying. It's when you stop trying, it's when you should be afraid. So when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, you'll surrender. Go to a meeting, get you a group, get you a posse, get you a cabinet of people that you can count on. Drug addiction is supposed to kill you. That's the way it's designed. Don't die, my brother. I love you, and I don't even know who you are. Don't give up.
Yeah, he's one of the most conscious viewers of this show.
Mm.
There's a old spiritual song.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I'm up, sometimes I'm down.
Right.
Oh, yes, Lord. One of the reasons we're resilient as a people is that we recognize that life cuts two ways, positive and negative, but we have the ability to transcend. And one of the reasons is that we always have a belief that things will get better. And so it's working on that. And as Miss Brianna has said, you reach a point where you just can't take it anymore. You know what I mean? You got to, the pain is too great. You got to move off of it. But it's not easy. I know, Gloria Miller, supplement with flush-free niacin, B3, 500 milligrams with each meal. Melancholia is symptomatic of deficits in vitamin B1 and B3. You got any comments on that in terms of nutrition and how that helps?
No, I wrote that down too, so that's a good one. Vegetables, actually, I'm looking at, this is really hard, going plant-based. I think I need to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my wife's a nutritionist, so she should be on the show. She could give people a lot of ideas, and I want to do some shows on this.
Yeah. Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, nutrition.
Yeah.
Gloria Miller, no one can be talked out of alcoholism. Alcoholism is symptomatic of a fatigued thalamus, the brain switchboard. Vitamin B3, for reasons unknown, returns this pseudo gland to proper function.
Okay, B3.
Yeah, okay. So nutrition is certainly one of the things, and what both of you were saying, self-care, taking care of your health is key, and nutrition is a big part of it. JB, I have a brother in prison doing 15 years, and my other brother was killed, so it's just me. I take care of my mom, but them AA meetings and NA meetings, God.
And God. Mm-hmm.
Good for you, JB. Good for you. JB, I would be an inch away from my life, and all I can hear is a voice that say, don't give up, and this is my message for the day. Yeah, right on.
Mm-hmm.
Quoting you on Sick and Tired of Being Sick and Tired. See if there's any questions in here. Referring to post-traumatic slave syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
Reverend McClendon, the bad food choices in our communities, food deserts, have made our bodies weak and unhealthy. That's talking about some of the causes of the problems. Sandra Hinton.
Wait, Reverend Amandra McClendon is part of my cabinet, and she would be great to have on here.
Okay.
You would fall in love with her too.
Okay. Right on. Sandra Hinton, your ability to create is one of the foundation in eliminating falsification, one story, our story, and mental alchemy. Let me just see if there's any. Tito District, JB, this is an inner conversation. We don't have Oprah. She's an individual with her own personal wealth that does not get redistributed in the community. She's done a little, but yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm.
She has done a little. Brother Ugawa, Lao Tzu, I remember that statement. Any book suggestions from that end? It wasn't bad. What about the Underground Railroad? Did it exist and why? Yeah, there was an Underground Railroad that was an escape route for Blacks who were enslaved, places where people could go, routes that they could take. Amos Wilson, Lao Tzu, in the lecture, The Falsification of African Consciousness, said that we should not look at psychology as simply descriptions of personalities, but as descriptions of how to create. What's your comment on that?
Say it again. I was reading another one.
Amos Wilson, in the lecture, The Falsification of African Consciousness, said that we should not look at psychology as simply descriptions of personalities, but as description of how to create.
Okay, I could see that. Because when you're thinking about psychology, you're thinking about, your mind and what your thoughts are, and how to create a healthier mindset, how to create a healthier way of being. I'm hoping that's the direction that I'm thinking about it in. That to slow down and think about what it is, what thoughts matter to you, what situations and ways of being matter to you, the psychology of all that. The psychology of well-being, I think, is really, psychology is thoughts, right? And how you think about a situation or a way of being, I think, is essential. And it's based on, environmental factors, community, historical, intergenerational, all of those elements have an impact on how you think about a thing. And then, my latest thing, well, it's not latest, it's 40 years old. I decided I could change my mind about the way that I think about things. I could change my mind about the way that I think about myself. And I didn't always know that. So being creative about how I think about myself, that's what I'm thinking about, what he's saying, Dr. Wilson.
So
that's pretty deep, though.
There's a question here in terms of the addictive personality. Can these personalities be created?
An addictive personality is the lack of the ability to control oneself or one's way of being. So you have a tendency to not being able to control the use of something. So if you think about my grandson, for example, he has an addiction to media. And the same thing happens when you have a media addiction as when you have a heroin addiction, that the drug in your brain, dopamine, is released. And it causes you to behave in a certain way. So when I take away his game, then it's the same thing that happens to a drug addict or alcoholic. When you take away the drugs and alcohol, they become sullen, they become sad and depressed. They don't want to engage in anything else. They just sit there lost and bewildered. Then when you give them the drug, then they become re-energized and they become playful and happy and willing to cooperate. Exact same thing. They're actually centers. I talked about that last time here. Addiction centers. So yeah, if you have an addictive personality, I know I have addictive personality. Now my addiction is school. I love learning. So I'm in 2 schools at one time. Really? And it's psychoanalytic theory. It's white people's theory. And I'm taking that theory and adjusting it to have a Black frame, because, psychoanalytic theory is when you're looking at the unconscious. So that Freud and all of them did that, but we also have intergenerational trauma that forces us to look at the unconscious. I might not have been a slave, but the impact of slavery has a great impact on my life based on internalized oppression. So we suffer with that, and not knowing about that is really key and essential, I think.
There's a thing that spiritual people have gone to the other side call cellular memory. And it makes sense because you got DNA, you've got all kinds of memory. Everything that God created is intelligent.
Right.
But if you're talking about cellular memory, then people have built into them thousands and thousands of years of memory of stuff.
Yep.
And I made this point before that we're often too focused on the 249 years of enslavement as the sole thing that shaped us. We're missing the culture we brought here, the culture we recreated here. We're missing the whole legacy that we have as human beings. And that is a part of what makes us what we are. So if there's 144,000 years of cellular memory combined with
epigenetics.
Yeah, epigenetics, and then compared to 249 years of enslavement, which do you think has the greater weight? The proof of the pie is, in the eating. And in this particular case, our humanism outweighs just about anything else. And that is at the core of this 144,000 years of memory. You know what I mean? Along with a lot of other things. Let's see, there was something else here. Oh, yeah. Well, let's see. Okay. Lao Tzu's talking about how the Western world went into China, the British in particular, put them on opium and stuff. And he's asking, are there any things we can learn in terms of how the Chinese got rid of it, in terms of how we get rid of it? And what I'd say is the Chinese got rid of it. They had a revolution, and they waged a civil war, and they won it. And one of the things that went out the window was drugs. It was banned. And guess what? If a state decides, that is, the government decides, there's not going to be any organized crime, there won't be any. Because the government has the power to do that, especially if they give people an alternative, a good life. So in our case, I think part of the application is part of our struggles for liberation is freeing ourselves from dependencies. And in the end, as we create just societies, but now in the midst of struggle, those are things we have to fight against and remove from our communities, but from our lives, but from the need for us to have them. That's really promoting love.
Yeah. And also to get rid of what's not of us, which is independence, like we're separate from one another, but rather have this interdependence. Like we have in our communities, we have interdependence. And this woman made an example one time. She said, there are two systems of dependence. One is like an A, where it's collective and you lean on one another and support one another. And then the other one is independent. So this is white people, independent. You should be on your own, stand on your own 2 feet. Nobody's here to support you. No, I ain't got that. And where we are interdependent, this is an A. And so we are of one another. I am because we are, right? I am because we are, not I'm all by myself, I'm alone, and I don't need nobody, and nobody can do nothing for me. That's not healthy. We weren't raised that way. We raised with community and support and love and engagement. That's what this looks like.
Yeah, that's key. Because when you're dealing with forces that are collective, then you need some collective forces to resist it. And these disorganized forces that have been put in our community have some power behind them. So we got to have some power behind us. It starts with the person, but then it's got to extend out into group effort. Your work that you're doing, that both of you are doing in terms of healing work, that's tied to some collective work. And that's what we got to be tied to as well. Let's see. Lao Tzu, racism, does it create conditions and condition us to be more susceptible to addiction? Also, have we located communities in which, despite the introduction of drugs, there was no epidemic of addiction. You've already answered the first question. You know of any communities in which they don't have a problem of drug addiction?
No,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah. And that's because of the nature of the society.
And because of addiction is addiction. And so, even when they had the crack epidemic and they didn't want to do anything about that because they're the ones that injected into it, when they came up with the opioid addiction, then all the world was like, oh, Lord, we got to put money in this. We have to save our children. Why? Because what they were saying was Black people and Black children didn't matter. And white people and white children do matter. And it's still the same pharmaceutical. Now they're putting man-made fentanyl into opioid, into that drug that they use for pain, and people are dying at a phenomenal rate. But white people are dying, and so they're paying attention to that. They didn't care when Black people were dying from heroin addiction. They didn't care when Black people were dying from crack addiction. So that's where the power comes in.
Come to the bottom here. I think we're about finished. There was a question on, are there any books that deal with the addiction to power?
I Googled that. I didn't see anything.
My book that's coming out. See, what you have to do is look at the construction of European culture, because it is basically constructed around power. I mean, that's basically
right.
This whole definition of Aryan, Lord and Master. It's the idea of control and power. And so that's key to their system. So we need to understand it better. We just often look at racism. We don't look at the other part, but there's more to it. Let's see if there's anything else.
Oh, there's a book here. I don't know anything about it. I just Googled it. Jim Orford, The Power Addiction.
Okay.
Here's a sister. Her name is, I'm making an assumption. Her name is Shawana Harris. I don't know, but Breaking the Power of Addiction. That's power of addiction, not addiction power.
Okay.
Okay,
I think that's it. I don't see, let me see this last one. Yeah, Brother Terranetta is talking about reading and how he hasn't stopped it. The key thing about reading is applying it, living it, that stuff that you get out of study, however it is, out of a book, our experience, exchange with other people, it's internalizing it so that you can live it. And that also, if you're trying to combat addiction, that's part of what helps. You got to be what it is you believe. And there's a lot of obstacles to that. So that's all I see here. This has been good. Brianna, this has been wonderful.
Thank you, Baba.
You have shed a lot of light of wisdom here, along with your good buddy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This has been pure pleasure.
Yeah.
You hear me?
She's the personal experience one, and I'm always a teacher, so I go to research and information. I love that. I love it because I have to back up. You just can't say something and not have the data to back it up. So that's how come I could put my fingers on stuff like that. And I think it's so important being a trauma specialist that I help people understand just the depth of that and how you're impacted by it, and we can't take it for granted. So I thank you for allowing me to be a vehicle and a vessel, and thank you for pouring into me, as Gloria says.
Well, both ways, because I'm learning. There's one final one here, LaShonda Henderson. What role does the social contract play into what is allowed into each community? I mean, getting in front of addiction barriers to entry. Do you understand what that question is?
What role does
social contract play into what is allowed into each community? I mean, getting in front of addiction. I think by social contract, she's talking about how the society is structured, what's permitted and what's not permitted. It has everything to do with it, because under capitalism and under racism, subordinating and controlling people is key. and dependency of all sorts works. And that's true also with the health system. It's all about
Mm-hmm.
getting people sick so you can make money.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the whole way the system is structured so that people are left out. Black people first and Native Americans, but everybody else as well. We're discarded, in this
Right.
system. So yeah, it plays every kind of role because it's structured into every level of society. I was watching the trailer on King James where Will Smith is playing Serena and
Mm-hmm.
his sister's, father, and it was talking about a press conference where the daughters were being interviewed, and one of the daughters said, I think it was the oldest one, she said, I'm confident that I'm going to beat this person. She was a little teenager. And this reporter kept saying, are you really confident? Are you sure you're confident? And her father interjected and said, stop that. This is
Right.
a little girl, and she's telling you she has self-confidence. Leave
Right.
her alone. So the
Right.
system is set up to try and break down
Right.
self-confidence. So one of the do's that you're talking about and the don'ts, one
Mm-hmm.
of mine, because I don't have a bunch of rules, it's more part of life. Like I
Yeah.
surround myself with everything I like, you know.
Right.
And one of the things is I have a rule. It's just a basic rule. I don't give a you know what someone else thinks about me, as long as I know I'm doing right. I don't care. I'm
Right.
not in this world for a popularity contest.
True that.
I'm in for doing right.
Right.
And right is often not popular. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's all a part of loving yourself. And that's not arrogance, because I
Mhm.
listen to what people say.
Right.
And if I hear something that's corrective or that can help me, I don't care where it comes from.
Right.
I'm going to draw from it. But I'll listen. But
Mhm.
you coming up here telling me something that is negating some part of me, well, that's a joke to me.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? If
Yeah.
it's taken away from my happiness, like I told you last week, I like to drive a sports car. I don't give 2 cents about the psycho babble on sports cars that
Right.
it's somebody who is trying to go back to the second childhood. That's probably true for a lot of white males because they're the ones that mainly buy sports cars. Explain my mother. She drove one, and I don't drive one because she did, because I didn't
Right.
like the one she had.
Right.
I got behind the wheel of an ugly TR4, but it handled so good, a British sports car. It cornered good. The way you went through the gears. And then I got me a TR6, then I got me a 300ZX, and I drive a Corvette, and it's red. And it has nothing to do with me proving a second childhood. You see this gray hair? You know what I mean? You ain't seeing me dyeing it. It's got to do with I like it. And a lot of
Yep.
people, when they buy a sports car, they pack it in the garage and look at it. I drive it every day.
Right. Do
Everything
you drive it
I like,
fast?
I do all the time.
Do you drive
What I
fast?
like, huh?
Drive fast.
Only in certain circumstances
Good. Thank
I
you.
can get away with it.
Thank you.
But I'm on an open road and
Okay.
there's
Good.
nothing in my rear view mirror and the front view mirror. Yeah, but other than that,
Okay.
it's acceptable stuff. But the
Right.
key point is, I've been told that ain't revolutionary. I don't care what are you talking about? A car don't have no philosophy. And since
Well, I don't
I'm
know about
driving
that.
it,
A Cadillac does.
uh, and since I'm driving it, and I'm revolutionary, and I'm the only one, ain't that revolutionary?
Right.
This ain't got nothing to do with pleasing nobody. This
Right.
has got to do with every time I get behind that wheel, it's pleasurable. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Huh?
Yep.
And I buy used cars, so I'm paying for that Corvette less than you're paying for most of these little ugly looking cars you all drive.
Mhm.
I'm not saying you all drive ugly looking cars. I know that Cadillac looks good to you. But the key point is, all I'm saying is, if you love yourself, you're looking at making yourself happy at the
Right.
same time while you're serving something greater than yourself.
Exactly.
And you take yourself out of misery that way. You know what I mean? But if you're living someone else's thoughts, you're in trouble. And so one of the key things about the Free the Mind Sixfold Stages to Mental Freedom, it gets you to the point where you see yourself through your own eyes. You see the world through your own eyes. And someone else's definition is not defining you.
Exactly.
And that's real key. And the last thing I care about is what the white power structure thinks. Later for them. Later for them. You know what I mean? No?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Later. Okay, that's it.
All right.
Thank you, lady.
You're welcome, kind sir. I appreciate you.
Pure pleasure. Right on.
All right.
Okay.
Have a blessed day. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Bye, everybody. Be blessed.
Okay, lady.
Okay,
And that's the same to everybody.